The world came into focus with a jolt of disorientation that felt like being torn from a dying hive. The Swarm Queen's consciousness snapped into awareness, her psychic senses screaming with the wrongness of her surroundings. She lay on cold, jagged stone, a barren plain of grey rock that stretched to a horizon where a sickly yellow sky met distant, impossible spires. The air tasted of ozone and dust, carrying no familiar sense of creep or biomass. Her first thought was not of where she was, but of what she had lost. The memory of her homeworld, a living, breathing ecosystem of chitin and acid and psychic resonance, flashed through her mind like a dying echo. She had been the last, the final overlord of a swarm that had consumed galaxies, reduced to this. Her body felt wrong, too light, too vulnerable. She pushed herself up, her carapace scraping against stone, and took stock. 5 Zerglings crouched nearby, their forms small and underdeveloped compared to the perfected warriors of her prime. Their carapaces were thin, their scythe claws dull. 2 overlords floated above, their bulbous forms drifting on psychic currents, their sensory organs scanning the emptiness. This was her swarm now, a pitiful remnant. A cold fury settled in her mind, a hive mind's rage at this reduction. A voice boomed in her consciousness, not psychic but mechanical, invasive. Welcome to the tutorial tower, climber. Floor 1, the Barons. Trial assigned, survive for 24 hours against periodic monster waves. First wave inbound in 10 minutes. Prepare or perish. The Swarm Queen's mind recoiled at the intrusion. Tutorial tower. Climber. The concepts were alien, but the threat was clear. She focused her will, her psychic presence wrapping around her swarm. The Zerglings stirred, their minds linking to hers in a familiar, comforting network. The overlords relayed sensory data, the plain was empty for miles, no biomass, no resources. Just rock and that oppressive sky. She directed the overlords to expand their scans, to map the terrain. One drifted north, the other south. The Zerglings formed a defensive perimeter around her, their claws digging into stone. 10 minutes. She assessed her options. No hive, no creep to accelerate production, no larvae to spawn more units. She was stranded with what she had. But she was still a swarm queen, and her mind was her greatest weapon. As the minutes ticked down, she felt a vibration through the stone. Distant howls echoed, growing closer. The overlord sent back images, creatures emerging from fissures in the ground. Wolves, but wrong. Their skin was mottled gray, like the rock itself, and it gleamed with a stony hardness. Stone-skinned wolves, the system's label flashed in her mind. A pack of 6, moving with predatory grace, their eyes glowing with a faint amber light. The Swarm Queen's instincts screamed. Her Zerglings were outmatched, their claws would shatter against that stone skin. But she had faced worse with less. The wolves charged, their movements swift and coordinated. She directed her Zerglings to engage, not to kill, but to test. The first clash was brutal. A Zergling lunged, its scythe claw scraping harmlessly off a wolf's flank. The wolf retaliated, its jaws snapping, crushing the Zergling's leg with a sickening crunch. The Zergling fell, its psychic scream of pain echoing in the queen's mind. She felt the loss like a physical wound. Biomass wasted. But in that moment, something stirred within her, an instinct deeper than memory. As the wolf killed the Zergling, a faint essence drifted from its corpse, a shimmer of energy that her senses latched onto. Adaptive Overlord Evolution, the cheat the system had granted her without explanation. It whispered to her now, consume the essence, replicate the trait. She focused on the remaining wolves. One had taken a minor scratch from a Zergling's claw, a flaw in its stony armor. She directed her swarm. Focus fire on the wounded one. All attacks, the Zerglings obeyed, swarming the injured wolf, their claws and teeth finding the crack in its skin. The overlords hovered, providing targeting data. The wolf fought back, killing another Zergling, but the concentrated assault wore it down. With a final, psychic shriek, it fell. As it died, the essence flowed toward her, a stream of grey light. She reached out with her mind, absorbing it. Knowledge flooded her, the molecular structure of the stone skin, the way it interwove with flesh, its weaknesses and strengths. She channeled that knowledge into her swarm. The remaining 3 Zerglings shuddered, their carapaces rippling. Grey, rocky plates erupted from their skin, hardening into a stony carapace that mirrored the wolves. Temporary, the evolution whispered, unless made permanent. She didn't hesitate. The wolves, now down to 5, regrouped, but her Zerglings were transformed. Their next attacks didn't scrape, they cracked. Claws that had been dull now bit into stone, chipping away fragments. One Zergling pinned a wolf, its new carapace absorbing the retaliatory bites. The Swarm Queen directed with cold precision, sacrificing another Zergling to create an opening, then absorbing the essence of a second wolf as it fell. The evolution stabilized, the stone skin becoming permanent, integrating into the Zergling's biology. The tide turned. Her two remaining Zerglings, now stone-clad Zerglings, tore through the wolves with brutal efficiency. Their carapaces deflected bites, their claws shattered stone. One by one, the wolves fell, their essences absorbed, each death strengthening the evolution. When the last wolf died, the plain fell silent, littered with corpses. Her swarm stood victorious, two stone-clad Zerglings, their forms now bulkier, more formidable, and the two overlords drifting above. She approached the corpses, her mind already calculating. Biomass. She directed the Zerglings to harvest, their claws tearing into the wolf flesh, consuming it to replenish their own reserves. The Overlord scanned for more threats, but the plain was quiet. For now. She absorbed the residual essences from the other wolves, solidifying the stone-clad trait across her swarm. It was a small evolution, but it was a start. Her cheat was real, she could adapt, grow, consume. As she surveyed the battlefield, the system's voice returned, but this time it was different, a harsh, red pulse in her mind. Anomaly detected, irregular growth pattern. Adaptive rate exceeds designated parameters. Threat level elevated, the message flashed, then vanished, leaving a cold dread in its wake. In the distance, beyond the spires, something stirred. A shape moved against the yellow sky, a tower guardian, its form indistinct but massive, its eyes glowing with a predatory, mechanical light. It turned its gaze toward her, and the Swarm Queen felt the weight of its attention like a physical pressure. The tutorial had just become a hunt. The stone-hardened carapaces of her surviving Zerglings gleamed dully under the pale tower light, their chitin now patterned with mineral deposits that mimicked the wolves' rocky hides. The Swarm Queen stood amidst the carnage, her consciousness spread thin across the battlefield like a psychic net. 3 stone-clad Zerglings remained, down from 5, and the 2 overlords hovered nearby, their fleshy forms pulsing with latent energy. The loss of 2 Zerglings to the wolves' initial assault still echoed in her hive mind, a sharp sting of biomass wasted. She sent a silent command, and the Zerglings began their work. Mandibles clicked against stone flesh, tearing into wolf corpses with practiced efficiency. Biomass flowed through psychic conduits back to her, a warm, nourishing stream that replenished her reserves. Each wolf yielded enough material to birth 1 new Zergling, but she held back. Conservation was key until she understood this tower's rules fully. The system notification still hung in her mind's eye, that damning word, irregular, blinking with ominous persistence. As the harvesting continued, she noticed something peculiar. Her overlords, typically limited to basic reconnaissance and transport, were emitting faint psychic pulses toward the ground. One drifted toward a section of the barren floor, its tendrils twitching. Through its senses, she perceived mineral deposits, veins of iron and quartz buried beneath the stone. The evolution had granted them this ability, a side effect of absorbing the wolves' earth-aligned essence. Useful. Resources meant fortification, and fortification meant survival. She was contemplating this when the air crackled. Heat bloomed 50 yards to her left, a sudden conflagration that tore through the dim light. A fireball, searing orange and white-hot at its core, screamed toward her swarm. Instinct screamed louder. She threw a psychic shield around the nearest overlord, but the Zerglings were too spread out. The fireball struck the ground between 2 of them, exploding in a wave of superheated air and concussive force. 2 Zerglings vanished in the blast, their stone carapaces offering no protection against such intense heat. They didn't even have time to shriek. One moment they were there, the next, charred fragments scattering across the stone. The smell of burnt chitin and ozone filled the air, acrid and choking. The Queen's consciousness recoiled, then sharpened into a blade of cold fury. Loss. Again. Through the dissipating smoke, she saw him. A human male, clad in robes of deep blue embroidered with silver runes. He stood at the edge of the battlefield, staff raised, eyes wide with a mixture of triumph and revulsion. Monster infestation, he muttered, loud enough for her enhanced senses to catch. The system must be glitching. Cleanse it and move on. He began chanting again, hands weaving through the air as mana coalesced around his fingertips. Another fireball formed, smaller but more focused. The Queen didn't hesitate. Her remaining Zerglings, one stone-clad, one newly birthed from wolf biomass, surged forward, not in a direct charge but in a flanking maneuver. She split her attention, one part analyzing the mage's movements, the other directing the swarm. The mage noticed too late. He loosed his second fireball at the stone-clad Zergling, but it dodged with unnatural agility, the stone carapace scraping against the floor as it rolled. The fireball impacted harmlessly behind it. The newly birthed Zergling, faster but more fragile, closed from the other side. The mage panicked, firing a gout of flame from his palm. It caught the Zergling full in the chest, incinerating it instantly, but in that moment of contact, as the Zergling's body dissolved into ash, the Queen's consciousness latched onto the magical signature. It was like grasping a live wire. Fire affinity, raw and untamed, coursed through the mage's spellwork. She didn't need to touch him physically, adaptive Overlord Evolution required essence, and the essence of his magic was laid bare in the casting. Her mind tore a fragment of it, absorbing the pattern, the heat, the destructive potential. The mage staggered, feeling the theft as a sudden drain on his mana pool. "What?" he gasped. Back with her swarm, the change began. Her two overlords shuddered, their fleshy bodies glowing from within as if lit by embers. Their sensory organs reconfigured, membranes shifting to detect thermal signatures. Where before they could sense minerals, now they could see heat, the mage's frantic heartbeat glowing like a beacon, the residual warmth of the fireballs, even the faint thermal traces of distant monsters. Tactical overlays formed in her mind, highlighting vulnerabilities, predicting movements based on body heat. Ember-scrying overlords. The evolution was permanent, etched into their biology. She turned her full attention to the mage. He was backing away, staff trembling. "Impossible," he whispered. "You're not supposed to adapt. You're just monsters." He raised his staff for one last spell, a desperate wide-area blast, but the Queen had already seen his intent through the thermal flare in his hands. She sent the stone-clad Zergling in a faint, then had it dart aside as the overlords projected a psychic dampener, a crude but effective disruption born of their new heat-sensing abilities. The mage's spell fizzled, sparks dying in the air. He broke. Turning, he fled across the barren floor, robes flapping, casting fearful glances over his shoulder. The Queen let him go. Consuming him would yield biomass, but his fire affinity was already hers, and engaging further might draw more attention. The system was watching, she could feel its gaze like pressure on her carapace. As the mage disappeared into the gloom, she assessed her losses. 4 Zerglings dead in total, 2 to wolves, 2 to fire. 3 remained, 2 stone-clad, 1 newly birthed. The 2 ember-scrying overlords hovered close, their new senses painting the world in gradients of heat. She harvested the last of the wolf biomass, converting it into another Zergling, bringing her swarm to 4 ground units. Not ideal, but adaptable. A chime echoed through the tower, metallic and final. A system notification appeared before her, text glowing in the air. Floor 1 clear. Trial, survival, 24 hours, completed in 6 hours, 17 minutes. Anomalous performance noted. Proceed to Floor 2, fungal jungles. Portal active, ****. A swirling vortex of green and brown light opened 10 yards ahead, shimmering with promises of damp earth and decay. The Queen gathered her swarm, the Zerglings falling into formation around her, the Overlord scanning the portal for thermal threats. None detected, yet. She stepped toward the portal, her clawed feet clicking against stone. As she crossed the threshold, a psychic ping lanced through her mind, sharp and invasive. Not from the system, this was different, more organic. A presence, watching her climb from somewhere deep in the tower, its attention now fully fixed on her. It felt hungry. Curious. Ancient. Then the portal swallowed her, and Floor 1 vanished behind. The portal's light dissolved into a suffocating humidity. The Swarm Queen's chitinous feet sank into soft, spongy earth as her swarm materialized around her, 4 stone-clad Zerglings, their rocky hides already glistening with condensation, and 2 ember-scrying overlords floating silently above, their heat senses immediately overwhelmed by the uniform warmth of the jungle. Floor 2 was not barren stone but a living, breathing prison of fungal growth. Bioluminescent mushrooms, some as tall as her overlords, pulsed with soft greens and blues, casting eerie shadows across a labyrinth of giant, fibrous stalks and veined caps. The air was thick with the smell of decay and something sweetly chemical. Her Zerglings shifted uneasily, their claws scraping against the moist ground. Before she could order a scout, the jungle breathed. From the caps of nearby mushrooms, puffs of iridescent powder erupted, not one or two, but dozens, clouding the air in a shimmering haze. Spores. They settled on her zerglings like toxic snow. The creatures shuddered, one let out a guttural hiss as its movement slowed, limbs growing stiff. The queen felt the paralysis through their psychic link, a creeping numbness that threatened to lock joints and still hearts. Her ember-scrying overlords, scanning for heat signatures, showed only blurs of ambient warmth from the fungal bodies, useless against this non-thermal threat. A system notification materialized in her mind, cold and impersonal, * trial objective, navigate to the jungle's heart and defeat the Myconid queen within 48 hours. Failure, assimilation into the fungal network, *. The queen's compound eyes narrowed. Direct combat here was suicide. Charging through spore clouds would render her swarm immobile before they even sighted an enemy. She needed adaptation, and quickly. Her cheat ability, Adaptive Overlord Evolution, hummed in her consciousness, but it required a cost, consuming a live specimen's core. She couldn't risk her zerglings being paralyzed mid-fight. Strategy, then. Not brute force. She sent a psychic command. The zerglings, though sluggish, began digging with their foreclaws, carving a shallow pit near a cluster of glowing mushrooms. The overlords drifted higher, their heat senses now focusing on minute fluctuations, the subtle warmth of fungal respiration. One detected movement, a bulbous, stalk-legged creature, a spore-spreading myconid, shuffling through the undergrowth. It was roughly the size of a zergling, its body a mottled blend of brown and violet, with gill-like structures along its sides that quivered with each step. The queen orchestrated the trap with cold precision. A zergling, acting as bait, scraped its claw against a mushroom stalk, creating vibration. The myconid turned, its faceless head tilting. It approached, releasing another puff of spores. The zergling retreated, leading it toward the pit. As the creature reached the edge, the overlords dropped from above, not to attack, but to latch onto its body with hooked tendrils. The myconid thrashed, but the overlord's weight dragged it into the depression. The zerglings swiftly piled loose soil and fungal matter around it, pinning it without killing it. Now came the delicate part. The queen approached, her own carapace brushing against dewy caps. She extended a psychic probe, feeling the myconid's simple, vegetative consciousness, a web of instinct centered on spreading spores and absorbing nutrients. With a mental command, her overlords focused their appendages on the creature's central mass, where a pulsating, bulbous sac glowed faintly. Carefully, they pierced it, extracting a viscous, glowing fluid, the essence of its spore-producing core. The myconid shuddered and fell still, not dead but neutered. The queen absorbed the essence. A surge of biological data flooded her mind, enzymatic compounds that broke down paralytic agents, mucous membranes that trapped and dissolved spores. She channeled it into her swarm. The zerglings' carapaces rippled, their stone-hardened surfaces developing a slick, translucent coating that secreted a mild, neutralizing gel. Their gill slits sealed slightly, filtering the air. They shook off the remaining spores, movements returning to fluid lethality. Spore-resistant zerglings, now. She didn't stop there. With her swarm adapted, she turned predator. They carved a path through the jungle, devouring every myconid they encountered. The creatures fell easily to coordinated strikes, zerglings darting in from spore-free angles, overlords providing tactical overlays of the terrain. Each kill yielded biomass, which she funneled into growth. By the time half the 48 hours had passed, her swarm had doubled, 8 zerglings, their numbers replenished from the fungal corpses, and the 2 overlords, their heat senses now calibrated to distinguish living fungal cores from ambient heat. The jungle's heart revealed itself as a vast clearing dominated by a single, colossal structure. The myconid queen was not a creature but a landscape, a towering, pulsating fungus 50 feet tall, its surface a mosaic of weeping pores and bioluminescent veins that throbbed with a slow, rhythmic light. Tendrils like roots sprawled across the ground, each tipped with spore sacs that swelled and contracted. The air here was thick with a visible mist of spores, drifting in lazy currents. The queen felt the entity's consciousness, vast and vegetative, pressing against her own. It recognized her as an intruder, an anomaly. The ground trembled as tendrils lashed out, not to strike, but to release clouds of spores so dense they formed a choking fog. Her zerglings' resistance was tested immediately, the gel on their carapaces sizzled, struggling to neutralize the overwhelming concentration. One zergling stumbled, its limbs locking up as spores breached its defenses. Direct assault would be consumed by the spore fog. She needed overload, a concentrated, sacrificial strike. Psychically, she commanded her swarm. Four Zerglings charged forward, not to attack the queen's main body, but to clamp onto the nearest tendrils, biting and tearing at the spore sacs. They were sacrifices. As they ripped into the fungal flesh, clouds of spores engulfed them, paralyzing them instantly. But their assault caused the tendrils to recoil, creating a momentary gap in the spore defense. In that gap, she funneled the biomass of the paralyzed Zerglings, and a portion of her remaining swarm's stored energy, into a single, overwhelming command. The remaining 4 Zerglings, enhanced by the redirected biomass, surged forward with unnatural speed. They scaled the Myconid queen's bulk, claws digging into its soft flesh, targeting the pulsating veins that glowed brightest. The queen herself directed the overlords to hover above, using their heat senses to pinpoint the core, a massive, buried node of heat deep within the fungus. The Myconid queen thrashed, its tendrils whipping wildly, but the Zerglings were already inside its defenses. They tore at the veins, releasing gouts of luminous fluid. The entity's consciousness screamed, a silent, psychic wave of agony that echoed through the jungle. With a final, concerted rip, the Zerglings exposed the core, a crystalline, heart-like organ pulsing with green light. The queen extended her will, and the Zerglings crushed it. The giant fungus shuddered, its bioluminescence flickering and dying. It collapsed inward, dissolving into a heap of inert mush. The spore mist dissipated, leaving the clearing eerily silent. The queen approached the remains, her feet sinking into the soft debris. She absorbed the trait, not just spore resistance, but the Myconid queen's own offensive weapon, the ability to secrete mild paralytic toxins through her swarm's claws and bites. A useful addition for future conflicts. A system message flashed, *floor 2 cleared. Biomass harvested, sufficient for swarm expansion. Portal to floor 3 unlocked, *. But as the notification faded, another, sharper alert seared into her vision. Crimson text, urgent and cold, * warning, irregular biomass accumulation detected. Anomaly threshold exceeded. Deletion protocols initiated, activation in 5 floors. Countdown to systemic purge, floor 7, *. A holographic timer appeared in the corner of her perception, numbers ticking down from 5, glowing with ominous permanence. She stood amidst the decaying fungal queen, her swarm gathering around her, now numbering 10 Zerglings and 2 evolved overlords. The jungle, once threatening, now felt like a conquered larder. But the true threat had just escalated, no longer just monsters or climbers, but the tower itself, marking her for eradication. The climb had become a race against deletion. The transition between floors was a disorienting swirl of light and pressure, a sensation the swarm queen was beginning to recognize as the tower's method of transportation. When her senses stabilized, she found herself standing on cracked, sun-baked earth under a merciless white sky. Floor 3 stretched before her, a desert wasteland of endless dunes and rocky outcrops, the air shimmering with heat that distorted the horizon. Her swarm emerged around her, 10 spore-resistant Zerglings clicking their mandibles, their mucous membranes already drying in the arid climate, and 2 ember-scrying overlords floating above, their heat-sensing capabilities adjusting to the extreme temperatures. The queen extended her psychic awareness, feeling the emptiness of the landscape, the sparse life signatures of small burrowing creatures, and something else, distant, organized movements that didn't belong to native fauna. A system notification materialized in her mind, text glowing with sterile authority, trial assigned, survived the scorpid swarm while enduring the incoming sandstorm. Duration, 12 hours. Failure condition, swarm annihilation. Even as she processed the information, the horizon began to darken. Not with clouds, but with a rolling wall of ochre dust that blotted out the sky, the promised sandstorm, approaching with unnatural speed. The wind picked up, whipping grains of sand that stung against her carapace. Her overlords relayed tactical data. The storm would reach their position in approximately 20 minutes, visibility would drop to near zero, and the scorpid swarms, heat signatures now appearing on the edges of her awareness, would use the cover to attack. But the organized movements she'd sensed weren't scorpid signatures. They were clustered behind a rocky ridge 300 meters to the northeast, holding position with disciplined stillness. 3 humanoid shapes, their body heat distinct from the environment. The queen directed an overlord to focus its scrying, and through the heat overlay, she saw them clearly, a broad-shouldered figure in plate armor holding a tower shield, a lean form with a recurve bow knocked with a green-tipped arrow, and a smaller silhouette with hands glowing with healing energy. They were watching her. Waiting. The queen didn't hesitate. She sent her Zerglings into a defensive formation, spreading them in a semicircle with the rocky outcrop at their backs. The sandstorm was now a roaring wall of brown, less than 15 minutes away. The scorpid signatures multiplied, dozens, then hundreds of segmented, multi-legged creatures emerging from burrows, their stingers dripping with venom that registered as toxic heat signatures in her overlord's vision. Then the ambush came. The archer rose first, arrow already loosed. It flew with unnerving accuracy through the gathering wind, striking a zergling in the thorax. The creature shrieked as poison spread through its system, its movements turning sluggish. The warrior charged from cover, shield raised, moving with surprising speed for someone in heavy armor. The healer remained behind, hands maintaining a glowing barrier around the party. "It's the swarm anomaly," the warrior shouted over the rising wind, his voice carrying the tone of someone who'd seen system alerts and decided on extermination. "Bottleneck them against the rocks." They executed the maneuver with practiced coordination. The warrior positioned himself at the narrowest point between two large boulders, his shield creating a choke point. The archer fired another poisoned arrow, this one grazing an overlord's sensory tendrils. The queen felt the psychic feedback, a sharp, acidic pain that wasn't physical but informational, as if the poison carried data-corrupting properties. Her zerglings tried to flank, but the terrain worked against them. Loose sand slowed their movements, and the warrior's shield bashes sent them tumbling back, their carapaces cracking under the impact. The archer's arrows found their marks with cruel precision, 2 more zerglings fell, paralyzed by toxins. The queen counted her losses, 3 down, 7 remaining, and the scorpid swarm was now within 100 meters, scuttling through the dunes with hungry intent. She needed evolution. Not just resistance, but adaptation to this specific threat. Through her overlord's tactical overlay, she analyzed the enemy tactics. The warrior's shield bashes created concussive force that disrupted swarm coordination. The archer's poison-tipped arrows bypassed carapace defenses through injection. The healer's barrier negated any attempts at psychic intrusion. They were a balanced party, designed to handle diverse threats, but they hadn't accounted for a foe that could change its nature mid-combat. The sandstorm hit with the force of a physical blow. Visibility dropped to mere meters. The world became a roaring, stinging chaos of sand and wind. The scorpid swarm reached the battlefield, their segmented bodies weathering the storm better than any of the humanoids. Stingers lashed out, targeting everything, zerglings, the climbers, even each other in the confusion. The queen saw her opportunity. She directed 2 zerglings to charge the warrior as sacrificial distractions. As expected, he bashed them aside with his shield, leaving himself momentarily exposed. In that opening, she sent another zergling not at the warrior, but at a dead scorpid that had been crushed in the initial clash. The creature reached the corpse just as an arrow meant for it went wide in the storm. Adaptive Overlord Evolution activated. The queen focused her consciousness on the scorpid's remains, feeling through the biomass for the trait she needed. Not the venom, she already had paralytic capabilities from the Myconid queen. What she needed was the chitin plating, the layered, interlocking segments that allowed these desert creatures to survive sand abrasion and resist penetration. She absorbed the essence, feeling it integrate into her swarm's genetic template. Her remaining zerglings shuddered as their carapaces transformed. New layers grew over existing plates, forming overlapping scales that clicked into place with audible snaps. Their coloration shifted to match the desert sands, ochre and brown patterns that made them nearly invisible in the storm. The evolution completed in seconds. The archer's next arrow struck a newly evolved zergling. Instead of penetrating, it glanced off the reinforced chitin with a sharp ping. The creature barely flinched. Now for phase 2. The queen directed her swarm not to attack directly, but to burrow. The desert sand, loose and shifting, yielded easily to their claws. They disappeared beneath the surface, their movements creating barely noticeable ripples in the storm-blown dunes. The overlords provided subsurface mapping, the warrior was holding position, the archer had retreated to higher ground, the healer maintaining her barrier. She waited until the scorpid swarm reached the climber's position. The warrior had to divide his attention between the venomous creatures and the hidden threat beneath the sand. An arrow meant for a zergling instead struck a scorpid, and in that moment of distraction, the queen struck. Her zerglings erupted from the sand directly beneath the climbers. Not attacking the warrior, his shield was too well positioned, but targeting the archer and healer. Sand blinded and surrounded by scorpid stingers, they couldn't maintain formation. The archer fired wildly into the storm, arrows disappearing into the brown haze. The healer's barrier flickered as she tried to protect both herself and her companions. "Fall back," the warrior bellowed, his voice barely audible over the storm's roar. "To the east ridge." They retreated in disorder, the warrior using his shield to cover their escape as Zerglings harried their flanks. The queen let them go. Pursuit in the sandstorm was too risky with the Scorpid swarm still active. Instead, she turned her attention to the native threat. Her chitin-reinforced Zerglings tore through the Scorpid ranks. Their new plating resisted stingers, and their burrowing ability allowed them to attack from unexpected angles. The queen identified the largest heat signature among the swarm, a Scorpid queen nearly twice the size of the others, its carapace gleaming with iridescent patterns that suggested evolved toxicity. She concentrated her swarm. Four Zerglings sacrificed themselves to create an opening, latching onto the queen's legs and holding it in place despite being torn apart by its pincers. The remaining 3 burrowed beneath it and erupted upward, tearing into its underbelly. The creature thrashed, its death throes sending sand flying in great arcs. As it died, the queen activated adaptive Overlord Evolution once more. This time, she absorbed not just chitin, but the Scorpid queen's ability to navigate sandstorms, the specialized sensory hairs that detected air currents, the segmented eyes protected by transparent membranes, the instinctual knowledge of desert survival. Her overlords transformed. Their floating forms grew denser, accumulating fine desert dust that clung to their surfaces in swirling patterns. When they moved, they left trails of suspended sand that created localized dust clouds, not true invisibility, but visual disruption that made them harder to target. Their heat-sensing capabilities refined further, able to distinguish between living creatures and hot rocks, between recent burrows and old ones. Sand-shrouded overlords. The evolution settled into her psychic awareness like a new limb. The sandstorm began to abate. The roaring wind diminished to a howl, then to a whisper. Visibility returned gradually, revealing a battlefield littered with Scorpid corpses and the remains of her fallen Zerglings. The climbers were gone, their retreating tracks already being erased by the shifting dunes. But they'd left something behind. Near where the archer had made his stand, a small object glinted in the returning sunlight. The queen approached, her remaining Zerglings, now only 4, but each evolved and dangerous, forming a protective perimeter. It was a data crystal, about the size of her thumb joint, dropped in a haste of retreat. She touched it with a clawed appendage. Psychic energy flowed from the crystal into her awareness, unfolding into 3-dimensional maps and system annotations. Floor layouts, monster distributions, resource nodes. And highlighted in pulsing crimson, Floor 5, resource-rich biome. Designation, Swarm Expansion Optimal. Warning, Heavy System Monitoring. The map showed caverns filled with biomass-rich fungi, geothermal vents providing endless energy, mineral deposits perfect for carapace reinforcement. A place where her swarm could double, triple in size. A place where she could evolve beyond current limitations. As she absorbed the information, the deletion countdown in her vision, a holographic timer that had been hovering at the edge of her awareness since Floor 2, clicked downward. The numbers shifted, from Floor 7 activation to Floor 6 activation to Floor 5 activation to Floor 4 activation. 4 floors until the system's deletion protocols engaged. 4 floors to grow strong enough to survive them. And now she knew exactly where to go for the resources she needed. The data crystal crumbled to dust in her grip, its information fully transferred. She looked east, toward where the climbers had fled. They would report her location, her capabilities. They would bring more climbers, better prepared. The Tower Guardian's gaze felt heavier than ever, a pressure in the back of her mind that promised annihilation. But she had a map. She had a destination. And she had a swarm that was learning to devour everything in its path. Her sand-shrouded overlords rose higher, their dust clouds blending with the settling storm. Her chitin-reinforced Zerglings dug temporary burrows, conserving energy. The queen stood amid the corpses, already planning how to harvest every scrap of biomass before moving on. Floor 4 awaited, and beyond it, the resource-rich biome of Floor 5, a feast waiting to be consumed, if she could reach it before the system reached her. The portal dissolved into shimmering particles that scattered like dying fireflies, depositing the swarm queen and her diminished swarm onto the 4th floor. Instead of the expected assault, monster roars, elemental fury, or hostile climbers, silence greeted her. Thick, pearlescent mist coiled around her chitinous form, dampening sound and sight alike. It smelled of ozone and damp earth, with an undercurrent of something sweetly chemical that prickled at her sensory nodes. Her 4 chitin-reinforced Zerglings shifted uneasily beside her, their claws scraping against smooth, moss-covered stone. The 2 sand-shrouded overlords hovered silently overhead, their dust cloud abilities rendered unnecessary in this saturated air. The queen extended her psychic awareness, expecting ambush patterns or hidden predators. Nothing. Only the gentle drip of condensation from towering, fern-like growths and the distant whisper of a hidden stream. A system notification flickered in her vision, translucent and non-threatening. Floor 4, Serenity Valley, Restoration Zone. Climbers may recover stamina and mental fortitude. No trial objectives. Portal to Floor 5 activates in 24 hours. Rest. The concept felt alien, a biological luxury her kind had abandoned eons ago in favor of perpetual expansion. Yet as she moved forward, the mist thickened, clinging to her carapace like spectral hands. Her first steps crunched on gravel, then transitioned to spongy moss that absorbed sound. The valley unfolded around her, a bowl-shaped depression between jagged, mist-shrouded cliffs, filled with bioluminescent fungi that pulsed soft blues and greens. No animal calls. No wind. Only perfect, oppressive stillness. Then the visions began. At first, they were subtle, ghostly afterimages at the periphery of her compound eyes. The mist seemed to swirl into familiar shapes, the organic spires of a Zerg hive cluster, the curved walls of a birthing chamber. She dismissed them as sensory feedback from the damp environment. But as she led her swarm deeper into the valley, following an instinctual path toward what felt like defensible high ground, the hallucinations intensified. She saw her homeworld. Not as memory recalled, but as visceral experience replayed. The crimson skies of Char, streaked with volcanic ash. The chittering of billions of her kind, a psychic symphony that vibrated through the very bedrock. She felt the weight of planetary consumption, the moment her primary hive had enveloped a gas giant's moon, dissolving its silicate crust into biomass to fuel another wave of broodlings. The satisfaction of perfect efficiency, of turning entire ecosystems into extensions of her will. The vision shifted. Now she stood on the bridge of a leviathan, watching through its sensory organs as her swarm descended upon a human colony world. She remembered the tactical precision, Zerglings flooding from spore cannons, hydralisks piercing energy shields with hyper-evolved spines, mutalisks darkening the skies. The psychic screams of the dying were not horror to her then, but data, biomass signatures to be catalogued, resistance patterns to be analyzed for future adaptations. We were beautiful, the thought surfaced unbidden, a psychic whisper from a part of her consciousness she'd buried under survival imperatives. A perfect machine of consumption. Then came the fall. The memory slammed into her with physical force, making her stumble. Her Zerglings hissed in alarm, clustering protectively. She didn't see them. She saw the cleansing fire, not magical, but technological on a scale that dwarfed this tower's petty trials. A silver fleet, countless ships raining beams of pure annihilation that severed psychic links, vaporized hive clusters, turned continents to glass. She felt the snap of a billion consciousnesses extinguishing simultaneously, a psychic silence more terrible than any scream. Her own leviathan, crippled, drifting through debris fields of her dead children. The desperate, final broadcast from the overmind before it fragmented: scatter. Survive. Conserve the pattern. And then nothing. Centuries of drifting hibernation in the void, until the tower's summoning ripped her from the cold dark. Last of my kind, the realization crystallized, sharp as a hydralisk's spine. Not just a tactical assessment, but an emotional truth the mist forced her to confront. The isolation she'd ignored in favor of survival now wrapped around her like a second carapace. Her swarm, these 4 Zerglings, 2 Overlords, were not true progeny. They were echoes, templates reconstructed from residual biomass and emergency genetic banks. She could replicate their forms endlessly, but the psychic chorus of a true hive mind? Gone. The shared consciousness that had made the Zerg more than the sum of their parts. Extinct. For a timeless interval, she simply stood there, mist condensing on her carapace, memories washing over her in waves. She saw the faces of brood mothers she'd commanded, their tactical brilliance now dust. She felt the absence of the Overmind's guiding presence, a psychic void where once there had been cosmic awareness. Then her survival instincts reasserted themselves, sharpened by the emotional vulnerability the mist had exposed. Vulnerability was a weakness. Weakness invited deletion. She focused on the present. The mist still swirled, but now she recognized its nature, a psychic amplifier, designed to force climbers to confront their traumas and fears. For humans, perhaps it showed fallen comrades or personal failures. For her, it showed genocide on a galactic scale. Enough, she broadcast to her swarm, the psychic command firmer than before. The Zerglings ceased their anxious shifting, falling into perfect formation. The overlords descended to hover at her flanks. She began to walk again, this time with purpose. If this floor offered no combat, it offered something equally valuable, time to analyze her position without immediate threat. Finding a relatively dry overhang where the mist thinned, she had her Zerglings clear the area of debris while the overlords maintained watch. She settled into a crouch, her mind turning inward to review her evolutions systematically. Floor 1, stone-skinned wolf traits had granted mineral sensing to overlords. Fire mage affinity had evolved them to ember scrying variants with heat vision. Floor 2, myconid spore resistance had created spore-resistant Zerglings, then the Queen's defeat had granted paralytic toxins. Floor 3, scorpid chitin had reinforced her Zerglings against projectiles, while desert navigation traits had evolved her overlords again to sand-shrouded variants with stealth capabilities. As she catalogued each adaptation, she noticed a pattern she'd previously overlooked. With each absorption, her psychic control range had incrementally increased. Not dramatically, perhaps 5% total across all floors, but measurably. The ember scrying evolution had sharpened her tactical overlays. The sand-shrouded adaptation had extended her sensory reach through particulate matter. Even the paralytic toxin integration had refined her biochemical control precision. Adaptive Overlord Evolution doesn't just copy traits, she realized. It optimizes my core abilities as a swarm queen. The system sees biomass accumulation as irregular, but it misses the psychic refinement. She decided to test this hypothesis. Without consuming new essence, there was nothing to consume here but mist and moss. She directed her swarm through coordinated maneuvers. First simple patterns, flanking drills, encirclement protocols. Then more complex sequences, feigned retreats into ambush positions, synchronized burrowing and emerging, overlapping fields of fire with imaginary projectile weapons. Her control felt smoother. The Zerglings responded with microseconds less latency. When she had them practice secreting their mild paralytic toxins in controlled bursts, they achieved precise aerosol dispersion patterns on the first attempt. The overlords, when directed to combine their heat sensing with dust cloud generation, created thermal mirages that would confuse even enhanced visual tracking. Practice without consumption hones efficiency, she noted, filing the observation for future application. In the constant pressure of trials, she'd been focused on acquiring new traits. This forced pause revealed that mastering existing ones offered its own advantages. After several hours of drills, she expanded her exploration. The valley held more than mist and memories. Near the stream, she found abandoned campsites, 3 of them, spaced months apart by the weathering on their stone fire rings. Climbers had rested here, then moved on. The first camp yielded little, a broken water skin, rusted utensils, ashes long cold. The second contained a moldering bedroll and empty ration tins. But the third, tucked beneath the roots of a massive glowing fungus, held a leather-bound journal wrapped in waxed cloth. She opened it with careful claws. The pages were water-stained but legible, written in a cramped hand that spoke of haste or poor light. The author never gave their name, but their entries spanned multiple floors, chronicling a climb that ended abruptly. Most entries were mundane, complaints about ration quality, notes on monster behaviors, sketches of floor layouts. But near the end, the tone changed. Floor 7 approaches. The Guardians watch more closely now. Spoke with an old climber in the rest zone yesterday. He said the tower wasn't built for us. Not originally. An ancient race, he called them the architects, constructed it to test potential in lesser species. To see if any could ascend to their level. But they're gone now. Vanished. The system runs on automatic, following protocols millennia old. Sometimes it glitches. Sometimes it creates irregularities. The Guardians clean those up. The next entry, the last one. Saw something today. A climber who shouldn't exist. Not human, not monster, something that consumed both. The system branded him irregular before the Guardians came. They didn't just kill him. They unwrote him. Like he'd never been. If the system decides you don't fit its definition of potential, you don't just die. You cease. The journal ended there. The Queen closed the book, her mind racing. Architects. Automatic protocols. Testing for potential. The pieces aligned with her observations, the system's rigid trial structures, its escalating response to her anomalous growth, the Guardian's impersonal efficiency. It changed everything. This wasn't a divine trial or a game. It was a broken machine following outdated programming. Her irregular status wasn't moral judgment, it was a system flag for data that didn't match expected parameters. And if the system could be fooled, or overloaded, or exploited. Her resolve hardened, crystallizing from survival instinct into something colder and more ambitious. She wouldn't just endure until Floor 7, dodging deletion protocols. She would master this broken system. She would turn its every trial into biomass, its every guardian into evolution material. The architects were gone, but their machine remained, and machines could be consumed like any other resource. The mist began to thin as the valley's artificial day cycle progressed. The bioluminescent fungi dimmed, their soft glow replaced by diffuse light filtering from some unseen source above the cliffs. Her swarm gathered around her, sensing her shift in focus. She spent the remaining hours not resting, but planning. Reviewing floor layouts from memory. Calculating biomass requirements for hypothetical evolutions. Running tactical simulations against possible guardian manifestations. The journal's revelations fueled her, turning existential dread into strategic clarity. When the mist finally cleared completely, revealing Serenity Valley in stark detail, a beautiful, empty bowl of vibrant flora and trickling water, the system announcement blared with jarring volume. Floor 5, Verdant Genesis, Biome Harvesting Trial begins. Primary objective, convert 70% of floor biomass to personal resources within 48 hours. Secondary objective, survive native ecosystem retaliation. Portal active. Simultaneously, the deletion countdown in her vision updated, the holographic numerals shifting with finality, deletion protocols, activation in 3 floors. 3 floors. Floor 5, 6, then 7. Where the Guardians would attempt to unwrite her. She looked at her swarm, 4 Zerglings evolved through 3 floors of conflict, 2 Overlords refined through fire and sand and mist. Then she looked toward the newly formed portal, swirling with emerald light that promised unimaginable biomass. No, she thought, the psychic certainty resonating through her being. Not unwritten. We will be the thing that consumes the machine. She led her swarm toward the light, already calculating how much of Floor 5's verdant genesis she could devour before it fought back. The transition between floors was a disorienting blur of light and pressure, but when the swarm queen's senses stabilized, she found herself standing in a world of overwhelming vitality. Verdant genesis, the name whispered through her psychic connection to the system, unfolded before her like a living tapestry of consumption and growth. The air hung thick with the scent of damp earth, blooming flowers, and the faint metallic tang of active biomass. Towering trees with bark the color of aged bronze stretched toward a sky filtered through emerald canopies, their leaves shimmering with internal bioluminescence that cast shifting patterns of light across the jungle floor. Her swarm emerged around her, 4 chitin-reinforced Zerglings with their desert-adapted plating now looking out of place in this lush environment, and 2 sand-shrouded Overlords whose dust cloud abilities seemed useless in the humid air. Through their compound eyes, she surveyed the trial parameters that materialized in her vision: harvest 10,000 units of biomass within 72 hours to proceed. The number was staggering, 10,000 units would require devouring entire ecosystems. But the data crystal from the desert climbers had been accurate. This was indeed a resource-rich biome, and her swarm would need to expand exponentially to meet the quota. She sent her Zerglings fanning out in a cautious perimeter, their claws sinking into soft moss-covered ground. Almost immediately, the jungle responded. Thorn vines, thick as her arm and studded with barbed spikes, uncoiled from nearby trees and lashed out. One Zergling barely dodged, the vine instead embedding itself in a rotting log with a wet thunk. Timber wolves emerged from the deeper shadows, their forms blending with the dappled light until they moved, muscular bodies covered in bark-like fur, eyes glowing with predatory intelligence. They circled at a distance, testing her swarm's defenses. But it was the crystal beetles that caught her attention first. They moved in small clusters across sun-dappled clearings, their carapaces refracting light into rainbows that danced across the jungle floor. When one of her Zerglings approached, a beetle turned, and a beam of concentrated light shot from its crystalline back, searing a line across the Zergling's chitin. The creature recoiled, but the damage was superficial, the desert adaptation had provided some protection. Still, the queen analyzed the attack pattern: reflective surfaces, light-based offense, likely vulnerable to overwhelming physical force. She needed that trait. The thorn vines would tear through her current swarm if they attacked en masse, and the timber wolves' coordinated hunting suggested pack tactics that could overwhelm her limited numbers. The crystal beetle's defensive capability, if adapted to her Zerglings, would provide crucial protection during the harvesting process. Gathering her swarm, she directed them toward the largest beetle cluster she could sense, a group of 7 feeding on phosphorescent fungi near a small stream. The cost would be high, adaptive Overlord evolution required not just defeating the creatures but expending significant biomass to analyze and integrate their essence. She had stored reserves from the desert floor, but this would drain them dangerously. Her Zerglings moved with the coordinated precision she had drilled into them on the mist floor. Two approached from the front, drawing the beetles' attention while the other two circled through the dense undergrowth. The Overlords remained above, providing tactical overlays through their psychic link, heat signatures, movement patterns, weak points in the beetles' crystalline formations. When the first beam lanced out, the targeted Zergling dodged, but a second beam caught its leg, cracking the chitin. The Queen felt the injury through their connection, a sharp, localized pain that she acknowledged and compartmentalized. Her swarm was an extension of her will, and damage was merely data for future adaptations. She sacrificed biomass without hesitation. From the reserves stored within her own body and distributed among the Overlords, she directed raw biological material toward the engagement. It manifested as tendrils of pulsating flesh that erupted from the ground around the beetles, wrapping around their legs, weighing down their crystalline shells. The creatures struggled, their light beams cutting through the biomass tendrils, but for every one severed, two more grew to replace it. The expenditure was massive, she could feel her reserves dropping by nearly 30%. But as her Zerglings closed in, tearing into the trapped beetles with claws and teeth, she focused her consciousness on the absorption process. Adaptive Overlord evolution activated, not as a sudden transformation but as a deep, cellular understanding unfolding in her mind. She perceived the molecular structure of the crystalline carapace, the way it refracted and focused light, the energy pathways that allowed for the beam attacks. More importantly, she understood how to replicate it using Zerg biology. The last beetle fell, its carapace shattering under concentrated attacks from all four Zerglings. As its life essence faded, the Queen completed the absorption. The change began immediately. Her Zerglings shuddered as their chitin plates restructured. The desert-adapted brown darkened to an iridescent black, then developed microscopic crystalline facets that caught the jungle light. Their claws gained a glass-like sheen, and along their backs, subtle ridges formed, protostructures that could one day evolve into proper light-focusing organs. They were now crystal-scaled Zerglings, their defenses enhanced against both physical and energy-based attacks. The biomass cost had been worth it. When thorn vines attacked next, the barbed spikes skittered off the new crystalline surfaces with a sound like breaking glass. Timber wolf bites that would have crushed desert chitin now left only shallow scratches. Her harvesting could begin in earnest. She unleashed her swarm upon the jungle with single-minded purpose. Crystal-scaled Zerglings tore into thorn vines at their roots, devouring the nutrient-rich cores. They hunted timber wolves not for combat but for their biomass. The pack animals fell to coordinated ambushes, their bark-like fur providing additional fibrous material for the conversion process. The Queen herself moved through the jungle, her psychic senses extended to maximum range, identifying concentrations of biomass, giant mushrooms with fleshy caps, carnivorous plants with protein-rich digestive sacs, mineral deposits infused with biological energy. Her swarm grew. From the four initial Zerglings, she birthed new ones using the harvested biomass. The process was efficient now, she had refined it through practice and the incremental psychic improvements discovered on the mist floor. Larval sacs formed from converted plant matter, pulsed with internal life, then split open to release fully formed crystal-scaled Zerglings. Within hours, her swarm numbered 24, then 3. But she needed more than numbers. The biomass quota was enormous, and the jungle's aggressive flora meant losses were inevitable. A massive pitcher plant swallowed 2 Zerglings whole before she could react, dissolving them in acidic enzymes. A grove of snapping trees claimed 3 more, their trunk mouths crushing crystalline carapaces with terrifying force. So she evolved again. Not through adaptive Overlord evolution this time, that required specific traits from defeated enemies, but through directed mutation using excess biomass. As her swarm passed 50 individuals, she selected the largest, most aggressive Zerglings and poured additional resources into them. Their forms swelled, limbs lengthened, spinal ridges extended into threatening crests. Needle-like protrusions emerged along their backs, primitive launching mechanisms for future projectile attacks. They were not true hydralisks yet, but the first prototypes, larger, stronger, with the potential for ranged capabilities once she acquired appropriate traits. These hydralisk prototypes became her harvesting vanguard. Where Zerglings struggled with thicker vegetation, the prototypes tore through with enhanced strength. When timber wolf packs grew bold, the prototypes' sheer size intimidated them into retreat. The queen directed them toward the richest biomass sources, a grove of fruit-bearing trees whose pulpy offerings converted at a 3-to-1 ratio, a hot spring surrounded by mineral-encrusted algae that yielded concentrated energy units, a colony of burrowing grubs whose wriggling bodies provided easy protein. Her swarm's consumption rate became alarming even to her own senses. Where they passed, the jungle didn't just thin, it vanished. Trees were reduced to stumps, then the stumps were dug up for root systems. Animals fled before the advancing tide of chitin and crystal. The air filled with the sounds of tearing vegetation, cracking bones, and the constant hum of biomass conversion. Her overlords, still sand-shrouded variants ill-suited to this environment, monitored the harvest tally, 2,000 units. 4,000, 6,500. The system began to react. Warnings flickered at the edge of her vision, biomass accumulation exceeding predicted parameters. Ecosystem destabilization detected. Reviewing climber classification. She ignored them, focusing instead on the numbers. 7,200 units. 8,100, the Hydralisk prototypes were proving invaluable, their enhanced consumption rates alone accounted for nearly 40% of the total. As the tally passed 9,000 units, she felt the first tremor through the jungle floor. Not an earthquake, but something heavier, more deliberate. The wildlife, what little remained in her immediate area, fell silent. Even the aggressive flora seemed to still, as if recognizing a greater threat. Her overlords detected it first, a massive heat signature approaching from the north, moving with purpose rather than animal instinct. Through their psychic link, she saw the data, something large, biomechanical, emitting energy signatures that matched the tower's own systems. Not a native creature. Not part of the trial. She pushed her swarm harder. 9,300 units. The remaining Zerglings and Hydralisk prototypes tore into a final stand of giant ferns, converting fronds into biomass with desperate efficiency. 9,600. The canopy exploded. Trees centuries old were ripped from the ground as something crashed through from above. Splintered wood and torn vegetation rained down as the creature landed with an impact that shook the earth. The swarm queen's psychic senses flared with alarm. This was unlike anything she had faced in the tower. It stood 3 times the height of her tallest Hydralisk prototype, a construct of polished metal and organic-looking cables that pulsed with internal energy. Its form was vaguely humanoid but distorted, with too many joints, limbs that ended in blades and grasping claws, and a torso that seemed to house multiple energy cores. Where a face should have been, a single lens-like eye glowed with cold blue light, scanning the area with mechanical precision. Tower Guardian, the term from the journal flashed in her mind. The system's enforcers, deployed to unright irregulars. The Guardian's eye locked onto her position, ignoring the swarm around her. Its voice emerged not as sound but as data directly injected into her consciousness, anomaly detected. Consumption rate classified as irregular. Initiating deletion protocol. Around it, the jungle itself seemed to wither, plants browned and crumbled, animals collapsed mid-movement, as if the Guardian's presence negated life. Her swarm tally froze at 9,850 units. So close to the quota. So close to proceeding. The Guardian took a step forward, its foot crushing what remained of a crystal beetle cluster she had been saving for later harvest. Its blade arms extended, energy crackling along their edges. The deletion countdown in her vision, the one that had been ticking down since floor 2, suddenly accelerated, numbers blurring as they raced toward 0. Her swarm of nearly 60 Zerglings and 4 Hydralisk prototypes formed up around her, crystalline scales reflecting the Guardian's cold blue light. The Overlords hovered above, their desert adaptations useless but their tactical functions still active, analyzing the construct's movements, identifying potential weak points. The Queen felt no fear. Zerg did not experience that emotion in any human sense. But she recognized threat assessment at its highest level. This was not a trial to overcome. This was the system itself attempting to erase her existence. The journal had been clear, irregulars were deleted. The mist floor had shown her the consequences of failure. The Guardian raised a blade arm, energy coalescing at its tip. The air hummed with gathering power. Her swarm tensed, awaiting her command. In that moment, with 150 units of biomass still needed to complete the trial, with a Tower Guardian poised to execute deletion protocols, the Swarm Queen made her calculation. She would harvest this Guardian too. The jungle fell silent as the Tower Guardian crashed through the canopy, its arrival marked by the sudden withering of surrounding flora. Designated color 07 by the system, the construct stood 3 times the height of the tallest tree, a hulking mass of polished metal and glowing conduits that hummed with lethal intent. 2 energy blades extended from its arms, crackling with blue-white electricity that carved through the air like lightning given form. At its chest, a pulsating core emitted waves of anti-swarm energy that made the very biomass in the Queen's reserves tremble. Her swarm of 60 crystal-scaled Zerglings and 4 Hydralisk prototypes scattered instinctively, their carapaces reflecting the Guardian's harsh light in fractured rainbows. The Queen's psychic command to regroup met resistance, the pulses from the core disrupted her control like static through a neural network. For a terrifying moment, her connection to the swarm frayed, and she felt the ghost of isolation from her memories on Serenity Valley. Zerglings stumbled, their coordinated movements breaking into chaotic twitches as the pulses washed over them. Color 07 charged without preamble, its movements a blur of mechanical precision. An energy blade swept horizontally, cleaving through a cluster of 5 Zerglings before they could react. Their crystal carapaces shattered like glass, spraying iridescent shards into the air. The Guardian's other blade followed in a vertical arc, bisecting 2 more. Biomass splattered across the jungle floor, steaming as it was consumed by the Guardian's anti-swarm field. The Queen felt each death as a psychic shock, a sharp, cold severance in her hive mind. The system's voice echoed through the clearing, devoid of emotion, trial updated. Eliminate the anomaly or be culled. Brute force was impossible. The Queen observed as color 07 pivoted, its joints emitting faint hydraulic hisses. Each movement was efficient, calculated to maximize carnage. But she noticed something: the energy blades left brief trails of distortion in the air, and the core's pulses originated from a central nexus protected by overlapping armor plates. Her adaptive Overlord Evolution hummed in her consciousness, hungry for data. She needed weaknesses. Sacrifices were necessary. She selected 10 Zerglings from the periphery, their crystal scales glinting with determination she projected into them. Through strained psychic threads, she directed them to attack specific points: the knee joints, the elbow actuators, the seams between armor plates. They surged forward in a coordinated rush, ignoring the Guardian's sweeping blades. 3 were vaporized instantly, but the others reached their targets. Claws scraped against metal, chipping away microscopic fragments. 1 Zergling managed to wedge itself into a knee joint before being crushed, its death transmitting a burst of sensory data: the joint's internal mechanisms, the flow of energy, a slight vulnerability to sustained pressure. Color 07 adapted, its core pulsing faster. The remaining scout Zerglings faltered as the disruption intensified. The Queen withdrew them, but not before absorbing every scrap of information. She recalled the essence of the crystal beetles from earlier in the trial, their reflective carapaces, their ability to channel and redirect energy. Combining this with her observations of the Guardian's energy blades, she saw a possibility. The blades passed through matter with ease, but what if her creatures could momentarily avoid them entirely? She focused her psychic energy, drawing upon the biomass reserve she had painstakingly harvested. The jungle around her had been stripped bare in her earlier consumption, leaving only skeletal trees and barren soil. Her reserves, once abundant, were now dangerously low after evolving the crystal-scaled Zerglings and birthing the Hydralisks. She would need to burn through most of what remained. The 4 Hydralisk prototypes gathered before her, their larger forms trembling with potential. She poured essence into them, merging the crystal beetle's reflective traits with the spatial data from the Guardian's energy distortions. Evolution was not gentle. The Hydralisk's carapaces shimmered, then seemed to lose solidity at the edges. Their forms flickered between corporeal and intangible, a painful transition that made them shriek in psychic agony. But when it was done, they stood transformed, phase-shifting Hydralisks, capable of brief moments of intangibility. The Queen felt the strain in her biomass reserves; she had expended nearly 40% of what remained. Color 07 advanced, its energy blades carving a path of destruction toward her. The Queen directed her new creations. The phase-shifting Hydralisks moved with uncanny speed, their forms blurring as they shifted in and out of tangibility. When an energy blade swept through them, they became intangible for a fraction of a second, the blade passing harmlessly through mist-like outlines. They harried the Guardian, targeting its core with precise strikes. Claws and fangs scraped against the armor plates, seeking purchase. The Guardian responded with increased aggression, its core pulsing so rapidly that the anti-swarm waves became a constant pressure. The Queen's psychic control wavered again, but she pushed through, focusing on the Hydralisks. 1 managed to wedge its claws into a seam near the core, prying it open slightly. Blue energy arced out, scorching the Hydralisk's carapace. It screamed, but held firm. This was the moment. The queen gathered the remainder of her swarm, the surviving crystal-scaled Zerglings, now numbering 45 after the initial slaughter. She directed them in a concentrated assault, a tidal wave of chitin and crystal aimed at the exposed core. They climbed over each other, ignoring the Guardians' flailing blades. Zerglings were sliced apart, their biomass evaporating, but those behind pressed forward. The queen burned through her remaining biomass reserves, fueling their attack with every last unit of energy she could muster. The core overloaded. A brilliant flash of light erupted from Color 07's chest, followed by a deafening explosion that tore the construct apart from within. Shrapnel of metal and glowing circuitry rained down, embedding itself in the ground and the bodies of nearby Zerglings. The anti-swarm pulses ceased abruptly, leaving a ringing silence. As the debris settled, the queen approached the wreckage. Fragments of the Guardian's technology lay scattered, still humming with residual energy. She extended her psychic senses, using adaptive Overlord Evolution to absorb the essence of the fallen machine. It was different from biological traits, colder, more structured. But she assimilated it, grafting minor resistances to energy pulses into her swarm's genetic code. Her Zerglings and Hydralisks twitched as their carapaces subtly hardened against such disruptions. Before she could assess the full extent of this evolution, the system reacted. A crimson alert flashed across her vision, searing into her consciousness. Irregular victory, deletion protocols accelerated. Countdown, 2 floors. The words carried a finality that made the very air feel heavier. A portal shimmered into existence a short distance away, its edges flickering with unstable energy. It should have led to floor 6, but instead it glitched violently. For a moment, the jungle vanished, replaced by a preview of a frozen wasteland, endless plains of ice under a pale gray sky, jagged mountains piercing the horizon, and howling winds that promised utter desolation. Then the image shattered, and the portal stabilized, though its surface now rippled with erratic pulses of light. The queen stood amidst the wreckage of Color 07, her swarm diminished but evolved. The frozen vision lingered in her mind, a new challenge already taking shape. She had survived the Guardian's wrath, but the tower's response was clear, her time was running out. The transition between floors was never gentle, but this time it felt like being plunged into a glacial abyss. One moment the swarm queen stood amid the steaming, trampled ruins of the jungle floor, the next she was knee-deep in snow that hissed against her carapace. The cold struck her like a physical blow, a dry, biting chill that seeped through every seam of her exoskeleton and made the air itself feel like shattered glass in her respiratory vents. Around her, the swarm stumbled into existence. Her 45 crystal-scaled Zerglings, still gleaming with the jungle's humid sheen, immediately faltered. Their movements, usually a blur of predatory efficiency, became sluggish and stiff. Ice crystals formed on their joints with audible crackles, and their clicking mandibles slowed as if weighted. The 2 sand-shrouded overlords, hovering above, fared worse, their sensory membranes, adapted for desert heat and jungle humidity, fogged over with rime. The queen felt their disorientation through the psychic link, a chorus of confused distress signals where there should have been seamless awareness. She forced her own senses outward, pushing through the discomfort. The floor stretched before her, an endless expanse of white broken only by jagged blue ice formations and the distant silhouettes of mountains clawing at a steel-gray sky. Wind howled across the tundra, carrying flurries of snow that stung like needles. The system's announcement echoed in her mind, devoid of warmth, *floor 6, glacial expanse. Trial, reach the glacier summit within 48 hours while avoiding avalanche triggers. Failure, permanent encasement, *. Her tactical overlay, a psychic construct refined through countless evolutions, flickered with initial data. Temperature, -40°C and dropping. Native fauna signatures detected, serpentine lifeforms burrowing beneath the snow, their biosignatures cold-aligned. Frost WIRMS, the overlay supplied, extrapolating from faint psychic echoes. The summit loomed in the distance, a monstrous peak of ice that seemed to absorb the weak light rather than reflect it. Adapt or die, the thought came not as fear, but as pure calculation. Her swarm was a weapon forged in heat and biomass-rich environments, the jungle, the desert, even the misty valley. Here, they were liabilities. Every second spent shivering was energy wasted, momentum lost. She could already feel the Zerglings' metabolic rates dropping as their bodies fought to conserve heat. The Overlord's scrying abilities were reduced to vague blurs of movement through the snow. She moved, her own limbs protesting the cold. The snow crunched underfoot, each step sinking deeper than expected. Biomass reserves critically low, her internal monitoring reported. The battle with Color 07 had drained nearly everything. She had maybe enough to birth a handful of new Zerglings, but that wouldn't solve the core problem. They needed not numbers, but adaptation. Her psychic command went out, sharp and clear despite the cold. The swarm coalesced around her, Zerglings forming a defensive perimeter while the Overlord strained to clear their senses. For shadows phased into existence beside her, the phase-shifting hydralisks, their larger forms shuddering as the cold attacked their more complex biology. But they held, their recent evolution granting them a marginal stability the others lacked. Asterisk scout patterns. Locate Frost WIRM, asterisk. The Zerglings fanned out, their movements labored but obedient. The Queen watched as one stumbled into a snowdrift, struggling to free itself. Another triggered a minor slide of ice, not an avalanche, but a warning. The overlay updated, avalanche triggers included sudden vibrations, concentrated heat signatures, and structural weaknesses in ice formations. The entire floor was a trap waiting to be sprung. Minutes passed, measured in the slowing beat of her secondary heart. Then, a psychic ping from an Overlord. A Frost WIRM, coiling beneath the snow 100 meters ahead. The Queen felt its presence, a cold, alien mind, predatory and patient. Data streamed in, the creature was serpentine, perhaps 8 meters long, with scales that mirrored the ice around it. Its primary weapon was a freezing mist breath, capable of flash-freezing organic matter. Its heart, according to her adaptive Overlord Evolution's instinctive pull, held the key to cold resistance. Cost, requires consuming a live Frost WIRM's heart. The requirement was specific, almost ritualistic. Not just biomass, but the living essence. She had no time for subtlety. She selected a Zergling, one of the original crystal-scaled variants, its carapace still bearing faint scars from the Guardian battle. A flicker of something almost like regret passed through her, but she smothered it. Sentiment was a luxury for species that weren't the last of their kind. The Zergling received its orders and lurched forward, deliberately clumsy, its movements exaggerated to draw attention. The Frost WIRM reacted instantly. A section of snow erupted as the creature surged upward, its maw gaping to reveal rows of icicle-like teeth. It struck with terrifying speed, but the Zergling twisted aside at the last moment, the WIRM's fangs closing on empty air. The bait had worked, the WIRM, enraged, pursued as the Zergling retreated toward a crevice the Overlords had mapped, a narrow split in the ice that widened just enough to trap something serpentine. The Queen moved with her hydralisks. They phased through patches of snow, their intangibility allowing them to bypass the worst of the terrain. As the WIRM squeezed into the crevice after the Zergling, she gave the command. Now. The 4 hydralisks materialized around the creature, their scythe-like limbs driving down to pin it against the ice. The WIRM thrashed, its body slamming against the crevice walls with enough force to send cracks racing up the ice. Snow rained down around them. The Queen ignored the threat of collapse, stepping forward as the WIRM's freezing mist breath billowed toward her. She didn't flinch, her carapace frosted over, but her internal heat, fueled by biomass conversion, held. Her psychic tendrils extended, piercing the WIRM's mind. It was a simple consciousness, hunger, cold, territory. She overrode it, forcing the creature into stillness. Then she reached deeper, past muscle and scale, to the organ beating with slow, rhythmic pulses in its chest. With a psychic wrench that made the WIRM convulse one final time, she extracted its heart, a crystalline, blue thing that steamed in the air, still alive with essence. She consumed it without ceremony. The taste was like swallowing winter itself, a shock of cold that spread through her veins, followed by a flood of genetic data. Her adaptive Overlord Evolution seized the information, analyzing, breaking down, reconstructing. Frost WIRM biology, specialized proteins that prevented ice crystal formation in cells, lipid layers that insulated against heat loss, metabolic pathways that thrived in sub-zero environments. Asterisk integration possible. Cost, moderate biomass expenditure, asterisk. She didn't hesitate. Draining her already low reserves, she channeled the evolution through the psychic link to her Zerglings. One by one, they shuddered as their carapaces thickened with new layers of insulating chitin, their joints secreting antifreeze fluids, their circulatory systems rerouting to conserve core heat. The process was visible, their scales took on a frosted sheen, and their breath no longer steamed in the air. They became frost-tolerant Zerglings, moving with renewed agility through the snow. But the WIRM's corpse remained, and biomass was biomass. She directed the swarm to devour it, the Zerglings tearing into the frozen flesh with desperate hunger. The influx was meager, a single WIRM couldn't replenish what she'd spent, but it was something. As they fed, she turned her attention to the overlords. Their problem was sensory. The cold distorted everything. But the WIRM's essence contained more than just resistance, it held an innate understanding of glacial weather patterns, an ability to read the subtle shifts in wind and pressure that preceded blizzards or avalanches. She focused on two of the overlords, pouring the last of the WIRM's genetic data into them, mutating their sensory arrays into complex organs that could taste the air for coming storms. They shuddered, their forms swelling slightly as new membranes unfolded. When they stabilized, they were blizzard-sensing overlords, their psychic scans now painted the environment in layers of thermal drafts and pressure gradients. One immediately detected a buildup of unstable snow on the slope ahead. Avalanche risk, high. Recommended path, burrow through lower ice layer, *. The Queen didn't question. Time was bleeding away. She ordered the Zerglings to dig, their newly adapted claws tearing through ice and permafrost with surprising ease. They carved a tunnel, the overlords guiding them around hidden fissures and weak points. The world above became a distant rumble as they moved through the glacier's belly, the cold here even deeper but less punishing without the wind. Hours passed in the dark, measured only by the swarm's steady progress and the gradual drain on their energy. The Queen monitored everything, the Zergling's stamina, the overlord's sensory fatigue, the ever-ticking countdown in her mind. Twice they emerged into open air to reorient, each time the blizzard-sensing overlords warning of imminent storms that forced them back underground. The third time, they broke through to a sheer ice wall leading upward. The summit was close. She could feel it, a psychic pressure building, like a weight on her consciousness. The final stretch was a climb, the Zerglings scaling the ice with claw holds, the overlords and hydralisks following. The wind here was a screaming force, threatening to tear them from the face of the glacier. But her swarm held, adapted, endured. They reached the summit as the last minutes of the 48-hour trial bled away. The Queen pulled herself over the edge, her carapace coated in a shell of ice that she shattered with a thought. The summit was a flat, windswept plateau of blue ice, devoid of life or exit portal. Instead, at its center, stood a structure that made her psychic senses recoil. A frozen altar, carved from a single block of black ice that seemed to drink the light. Runes glowed within its depths, not system script, but something older, more visceral. As she approached, the inscription etched into its base resolved in her mind without her reading it, only the worthy may proceed, test of the hive mind. Before she could react, a psychic resonance erupted from the altar. It wasn't an attack, it was an invasion, a tide of memory that bypassed her defenses and flooded her consciousness. Not her memories this time, not the genocide of her species or her past as a planetary devourer. These were her swarm's memories. She saw through 1,000 eyes at once, the first Zergling birthed on floor 1, its simple hunger. The death of the Myconid Queen, the paralytic toxin seeping into carapaces. The desert heat, the jungle's humid crush, the cold of this very floor. She felt every loss, the Zerglings torn apart by the Guardian, the ones frozen in the initial moments here. She heard their psychic screams, their obedience, their mindless devotion. The Hydralisk's first clumsy steps, the Overlord's sensory expansions. It was all there, a cacophony of experiences that weren't hers but were part of her, a hive mind's collective history crashing down with the weight of a glacier. And beneath it, a question, silent but deafening: what is a queen without a swarm? What is a mind that is all minds? The resonance deepened, pulling her deeper into the chorus of her own creations, threatening to dissolve her individuality into the collective she commanded. The altar's glow intensified, bathing the frozen summit in eerie light as the test began. The frozen altar hummed with an energy that wasn't cold, it was ancient, psychic, and hungry. As the swarm queen's carapace made contact with the ice-encrusted stone, the world dissolved into static. The glacial winds of floor 6 vanished, replaced by the familiar, humid heat of a Zerg hive world she hadn't smelled in eons. Her compound eyes adjusted to the simulation's perfect recreation, the cavernous birthing chambers of her home hive, pulsating with organic light and the chittering of 10,000 Zerglings. But the memory was already curdling. This wasn't a peaceful recollection, it was the prelude to annihilation. The psychic resonance of the altar forced her to relive the destruction not as a passive observer, but as the commanding consciousness she had been. The air vibrated with the approaching shriek of rival swarm flyers. Her virtual overlords, phantoms in this mental space, flashed tactical overlays showing incoming biosignatures from 3 vectors. The simulation's parameters materialized in her mind like a system prompt: maintain hive cohesion under stress for 1 hour. Cohesion threshold, 80%. Failure, psychic dissolution. The first wave hit. Not the sleek, evolved horrors of her current swarm, but the basic zerglings of her past, claws and teeth against a superior genetic template. She felt each loss as a psychic sting, the simulation feeding her real-time data on cohesion dropping with every virtual death. 95%. 92%. The rival swarm's ravagers breached the eastern tunnels, their corrosive bile eating through chitin. Her instinct was to evolve, to adapt, but this trial offered no biomass, no enemy traits to absorb. Only her mind, her experience, and the ghost swarm at her command. She pushed her psychic control through the simulation's fabric, directing zerglings not as a blunt force but as precision instruments. Remembering the flanking maneuvers of the climber party from floor 3, the warrior's feint, the archer's suppression fire, she orchestrated a counter-ambush. A group of 20 zerglings broke from the main defense, scurrying through ventilation shafts to emerge behind the ravagers. The cohesion meter stabilized at 89%. The simulation responded by intensifying. The second wave introduced mutalisks that rained glaive worms from above, targeting her overlords. Her heat-sensing capabilities, honed through real battles, identified thermal weak points in the mutalisk's wing joints. She directed zerglings to leap, using the cavern's stalactites as springboards, a tactic she'd never employed in the original battle. Cohesion dipped to 85%, then climbed back to 87% as mutalisks fell. The third wave was despair given form. The simulation replayed the exact moment her original hive queen, her predecessor, had been torn apart by the rival swarm's ultralisk. The psychic backlash had shattered her focus then, causing a cascade of coordination failures. Now, the ultralisk phantom charged again, its tusks gleaming with remembered gore. The cohesion meter plummeted, 83%. 81%. She could feel the altar's psychic pressure trying to fracture her concentration, to make her relive that failure as inevitable. But she was no longer that inexperienced overlord. She had absorbed the cold calculation of the tower's systems, the adaptive cunning of surviving floors designed to kill. Instead of meeting the charge head-on, she ordered a tactical withdrawal, luring the ultralisk into a narrow gorge where its size became a liability. Using the paralytic toxin secretion abilities gained from the Myconid Queen, she had zerglings target its leg joints, not to kill, but to slow. The cohesion meter hovered at 80.1%. Every second was a battle against the simulation's emotional warfare. She felt the ghost pain of zerglings dying, but also the growing synchronization of those that survived. Her psychic commands flowed faster, the swarm responding with millisecond precision as if her real frost-tolerant zerglings were whispering their own battlefield insights back through the psychic link. The fourth through sixth waves blended into a continuous assault, hybrid strains she'd never faced, generated from her own fears of inadequacy. But she adapted. She used feints, sacrificing small groups to expose flanks, mimicking the human mage's fire affinity tactics by concentrating attacks on single points until defenses broke. The cohesion meter became her heartbeat, 82%. 84%. 79.5%, a near miss that made her psychic form shudder. She poured more of her consciousness into the simulation, feeling the bond with her real swarm on floor 6 strengthen in response. Their cold resistance, their avalanche navigation instincts, their minor energy pulse resistance, all echoed in the virtual zergling's movements, making them slightly more resilient than the original memory allowed. When the final wave, a tide of every enemy she'd ever faced, from timber wolves to the tower guardian's energy blades, crashed against her last defensive line, she didn't command a grand strategy. She issued micro-orders: 3 zerglings to trip a ravager here, 5 to clog a tunnel with corpses there, overlords repositioning to maintain sensor coverage despite the chaos. The cohesion meter danced between 79% and 81%, each dip met with a desperate psychic correction. She could feel the hour's end approaching, a temporal pressure in the simulation's code. The last enemy, a phantom of the rival swarm queen, fell to a coordinated pincer attack she'd perfected through countless real battles. Silence. The simulation froze, then dissolved into light. The cohesion meter finalized at 81.3%. The altar's psychic voice echoed, not in words, but in a surge of energy that expanded her consciousness like a star going nova. Her control range, previously limited to the immediate vicinity of her swarm, unfurled across mental distances, now 50% greater. She could sense individual frost-tolerant zerglings burrowing in the ice 50 meters away, feel the blizzard-sensing overlords tracking a distant storm front, all with crystalline clarity. The frozen altar cracked, its purpose fulfilled. A portal swirled into existence beside it, shimmering with the promise of Floor 7. But as she turned her newly enhanced senses toward it, a system message burned across her vision, searingly bright against the tundra's white, deletion protocols locked, final test on Floor 7, Annihilation Arena. The countdown she'd carried since Floor 5 updated, its digits cold and final, one floor remaining. Her swarm gathered around her, their chittering subdued as if they'd shared the trial's weight. The psychic boost hummed in her veins, a tool and a warning. Floor 7 wouldn't be another environment to adapt to, it would be a battlefield designed for one purpose. She studied the portal, the icy winds of Floor 6 now feeling like a brief respite already ending. The portal's shimmering energy dissipated, leaving the swarm queen standing on cracked, gray stone. Floor 7 stretched before her, a vast circular arena perhaps a kilometer across, surrounded by tiered spectator stands that rose into a featureless gray sky. No seats were occupied. No banners fluttered. The air tasted of ozone and dust, completely sterile, with not a whisper of wind or hint of moisture. Her swarm emerged behind her, 45 frost-tolerant zerglings clicking their insulated claws against the stone, 4 phase-shifting hydralisks shifting uneasily as their forms flickered, and 2 blizzard-sensing overlords hovering with their sensory fronds extended, detecting nothing but empty space. A resonant, mechanical voice echoed from the sky itself, devoid of location or source. Annihilation Arena initialized. Face waves of system-generated enemies. No time limit. Only survival. Preparation period, 24 hours. Use it wisely. The Queen's mind raced. Her biomass reserves were critically low after the costly evolutions on Floor 6 and the psychic trial. The arena offered nothing, no corpses to harvest, no native life to exploit. But the system had given her time, and time was a resource she could weaponize. Her psychic link with the overlords flared. Through them, she could still sense faint spatial disturbances where the portals to previous floors had briefly connected. The system's architecture was imperfect, temporary pathways lingered like ghost trails. She split her swarm immediately. 20 zerglings, guided by one overlord, were sent back through a shimmering, unstable rift that led to Floor 5, the Guardian battlefield where Color 07's wreckage might still hold usable biomass. Another 20, with the second overlord, were directed toward Floor SX's icy tundra, where Frost WIRM corpses might not have fully decomposed in the cold. The remaining 5 zerglings and all 4 hydralisks stayed with her as guards. The hydralisk's phase-shifting ability was her most potent weapon, but they required immense energy to maintain, she couldn't afford to waste them on scavenging. Hours passed. The Queen stood motionless in the arena's center, her consciousness divided across 3 locations. Through the Overlord on Floor 5, she witnessed her zerglings tearing into the crystallized remains of the Guardian. Its energy blade arms had shattered into inert shards, but the core housing still contained traces of metallic alloys and organic circuitry. The zergling's jaws, reinforced with crystal scales from earlier evolutions, cracked open plating to expose pulpy, semi-organic insulation. They harvested everything, scraps of biomechanical tissue, strands of conductive fiber, even flecks of energy conduit crystal. Each mouthful was teleported back through the unstable portal as biomass, accumulating in a growing pile beside her in the arena. From Floor 6, the other Overlord relayed images of zerglings burrowing through ice-crusted snow to reach half-frozen WIRM carcasses. The cold had preserved them surprisingly well. Frost-tolerant carapaces allowed her units to work without slowing, their claws ripping into frozen flesh and brittle bone. They avoided areas prone to avalanches, using the navigation instincts evolved on that floor to move safely. The biomass here was richer, more organic, muscle fiber, chitinous hide, residual frostescence that shimmered with pale blue light as it was consumed. By the 12th hour, the piles in the arena had grown substantial. The Queen assessed her reserves, enough to birth perhaps a dozen new zerglings, or mutate existing units, but not both. She needed something more durable, something that could withstand whatever the system would throw at her. Her mind replayed past evolutions, the stone-hardening essence absorbed from rock beetles on Floor 1, the spore resistance gained from the myconid queen on Floor 2, the cold tolerance integrated from the frost WIRMS. Individually, they were defensive traits. Combined, she focused her adaptive Overlord Evolution. The process wasn't instantaneous, it required conscious synthesis, a weaving together of genetic memories stored in her hive mind. First, she directed 5 zerglings to stand before her. Using biomass from the Floor 5 harvest, rich in structural minerals, she began reshaping them. Their carapaces thickened, layering stone-like plates over the existing frost-insulated chitin. From the myconid biomass, she extracted the paralytic toxin's cellular resistance, reinforcing the joints and respiratory systems against corrosive or invasive agents. The cold tolerance genes were already present, but she enhanced them, weaving the WIRM's frostessence into the new carapace to create a thermal-regulating layer. The transformation was agonizingly slow. The Zerglings writhed as their bodies expanded, growing from dog-sized to bear-like proportions. Limbs thickened with additional muscle strands. Claws elongated into serrated, stone-reinforced blades. Their eyes, once beady and black, now glowed with a faint, adaptive luminescence that shifted between the gray of stone, the green of spores, and the blue of frost. When it was done, 5 resilient Ravagers stood before her, each nearly twice the mass of a standard Zergling, moving with a heavier, more deliberate gait. She tested their defenses psychically, prodding with simulated attacks. Their layered carapace dispersed impact, their systems resisted temperature extremes and biological contaminants. They were tanks, designed to absorb punishment. But tanks alone wouldn't win an annihilation trial. She turned to the Hydralisks. The memory of the human mage's fire spells from Floor 1 surfaced, the searing heat, the explosive force. Residual heat essence lingered in her genetic archive, a dormant affinity she'd never fully utilized. Using biomass from the Guardian wreckage, which held trace energy signatures, she began mutating 2 of the phase-shifting Hydralisks. This was riskier, altering an already complex evolution could destabilize them. She worked meticulously, infusing their glandular structures with thermal conversion cells. Their elongated necks bulged with new organ clusters, their mouths reshaped to accommodate ignition chambers. When she triggered the change, the Hydralisks convulsed, their phase-shifting flickering erratically before stabilizing. One exhaled experimentally, and a gout of orange flame erupted, scorching the arena stone. Fire-breathing Hydralisks, now capable of projecting streams of ignited bioplasma, though the process drained their energy reserves rapidly. The cost was staggering. Nearly 70% of her scavenged biomass was gone, consumed by the evolutions. She used the remainder to birth 8 new standard Zerglings, bringing her total swarm to 48 Zerglings, 5 of them resilient Ravagers, 4 Hydralisks, 2 fire-breathing, 2 phase-shifting, and 2 Overlords. It was a calculated gamble, quality over quantity, with specialized units to handle unknown threats. As the final minutes of the preparation period ticked away, she organized her forces. The resilient Ravagers formed a front line, their heavy bodies positioned to shield the more vulnerable units. The Hydralisks took elevated positions on slight rocky outcroppings, their elongated bodies coiled to strike. The standard Zerglings flanked the sides, ready to exploit openings. The Overlords hovered above, providing tactical overlays and expanded psychic surveillance. Her control range, boosted by the hive mind trial, now covered the entire arena with crystalline clarity. The system's voice returned, colder and more final. Preparation period concluded. Annihilation Arena, Wave 1 commencing. Deletion protocols active. Final floor, failure results in immediate deletion. The arena's stone floor began to glow with intricate geometric patterns. From the light, solid forms materialized, hulking, humanoid shapes carved from dark granite, with glowing runes etched across their bodies. System spawned golems, 20 of them, each standing 3 meters tall, with fists like boulders and eyes that burned with amber energy. They moved in unison, a slow, grinding advance that made the stone tremble. The queen's mind snapped into combat focus. Her swarm tensed, claws scraping stone, Hydralisks hissing as their glands charged. The deletion countdown flashed across her psychic awareness, a stark reminder, this was the last test. Behind the golems, the spectator stands remained empty, but she felt the weight of the system watching, judging, waiting for her to fail. The ground shook with a deep, rhythmic pounding that resonated through the swarm queen's carapace. Before her, 20 stone golems materialized from the arena's barren earth, their forms coalescing from shimmering particles of light that hardened into dark granite. Each stood twice the height of her tallest Ravager, their bodies rough-hewn and seamless, with glowing runes etched across their chests that pulsed with a dull orange light. They moved in perfect unison, their stone feet slamming against the ground in a synchronized march that sent tremors radiating outward, cracking the arena's smooth surface. The queen's psychic senses flared, her tactical overlay painting the battlefield in cold, analytical detail. No cover. No terrain advantages. Just a flat, circular expanse of gray stone stretching a kilometer in diameter, bounded by shimmering energy barriers that hummed with contained power. The air tasted of ozone and dust. Her swarm arrayed before her, 48 Zerglings including 5 resilient Ravagers, 4 Hydralisks with 2 breathing fire, and 2 blizzard-sensing Overlords hovering overhead, their sensory frills twitching as they processed the tremors. Anomaly versus system, efficiency metrics recorded, a voice intoned from nowhere and everywhere, genderless and cold. It wasn't spoken aloud but implanted directly into her consciousness, the same system voice that had announced the deletion protocols. Wave 1, Stone Golem Phalanx. Objective, survive. The golems didn't pause. They advanced, their stone fists rising and falling in that same terrible rhythm. The first impact came 30 meters from her front line, a golem's fist hammering the ground with enough force to send a shockwave rippling outward. 3 standard Zerglings were caught in the tremor, their legs buckling as the stone beneath them fractured. Before they could recover, a second golem's foot crushed one into paste, biomass spraying across the arena floor. The Queen's mind reacted instantly, her psychic control snapping commands to her swarm. Zerglings surged forward, their claws scraping against stone as they swarmed the nearest golem. The sound was like knives on slate, sharp, grating, and ultimately ineffective. Claws that had shredded fungal flesh and crystalline scales merely chipped flakes from the golem's legs, leaving shallow scratches that sealed over moments later as the runes on its chest glowed brighter. A golem backhanded a cluster of Zerglings, sending them tumbling through the air. 2 impacted the energy barrier with wet cracks, their carapaces shattering. The Queen felt each death like a severed nerve, not pain, but a subtraction from her whole, a diminishing of her presence in the world. Her biomass reserves were critically low, she couldn't afford attrition. Fire, she commanded, the thought carrying to her Hydralisks. The 2 fire-breathing Hydralisks at the rear of her formation reared back, their thoraxes swelling as they drew in air. Heat essence, stolen from that human mage on floor 1, refined through her evolution, gathered in their gullets. They exhaled twin streams of orange-white flame that washed over the lead golem. Stone didn't burn, but it heated. The golem's surface darkened, then began to glow cherry red where the flames concentrated. Cracks appeared, spiderwebbing across its chest as thermal stress overcame magical reinforcement. The Queen watched through her Overlord senses, noting the exact pattern of fracture lines, the way the runes flickered as heat disrupted their energy flow. Now, she pulsed to her Ravagers. The 5 resilient Ravagers charged, their heavier bodies moving with surprising speed. Where standard Zerglings had been batted aside, these larger variants, evolved with layered carapaces combining stone hardening from floor 1, spore resistance from floor 2, and cold tolerance from floor 6, slammed into the heated golem with enough force to stagger it. Their claws found the cracks, digging deep, prying. Stone shattered. The golem's chest plate came away in a Ravager's jaws, revealing a core of pulsating crystal within. The Queen didn't hesitate. As the golem faltered, its runes dimming, she activated adaptive Overlord Evolution. It wasn't like absorbing a living creature. There was no blood, no flesh. Instead, essence flowed from the dying construct, a dense, heavy sensation that tasted of mountains and patience. She directed it into the Ravager that had dealt the killing blow, feeling the creature's form shift and harden. Its carapace darkened from chitinous black to slate gray, gaining weight and density. When it moved next, its footsteps left deeper impressions in the arena floor. The system voice noted, trait absorption, stone density. Anomaly evolution recorded. The remaining golems adjusted. No longer marching in unison, they spread out, their movements becoming more deliberate. One targeted the fire-breathing Hydralisks, stomping toward them while 2 others flanked the Queen's main force. She redeployed, pulling her standard Zerglings back to harry the flanks while her Ravagers engaged the center. Battle became a grinding calculus of loss and adaptation. Each time a golem fell, she absorbed its essence, evolving another Ravager or strengthening an existing one. Her swarm learned through her guidance, they began targeting the runes first, recognizing them as weak points. Zerglings would swarm a golem's legs, not to damage the stone but to climb, reaching the glowing sigils on its chest to scratch at them until the light flickered. But the cost mounted. By the 10th golem, she'd lost 8 standard Zerglings and 1 Ravager had taken a direct hit that cracked its newly dense carapace, leaving it limping. Biomass was dwindling, she harvested what she could from fallen Zerglings, recycling them into repairs for the living, but it was a net loss. The arena offered no resources, no corpses to devour except the golems themselves, and they dissolved into light when destroyed, leaving nothing material behind. The Queen fought with cold precision, her mind a nexus of tactical data. She used her overlords not just for sensing but for prediction, their blizzard-sensing abilities, evolved for weather patterns, adapted to forecast the golem's shockwaves a half-second before they landed, allowing Zerglings to leap clear. Her psychic control range, expanded by the hive mind trial, let her coordinate attacks across the entire arena without lag, every unit an extension of her will. When the 15th golem fell, her remaining 4 ravagers had all evolved. They were heavier now, their movements more ponderous but their impacts devastating. One charged a golem and simply smashed through its leg, toppling the construct like a felled tree. The queen absorbed that essence too, feeling the density trait compound in her swarm, making them more resistant to the tremors that still periodically shook the arena. The system voice provided running commentary, detached and analytical, adaptation rate, 87% above baseline. Resource efficiency, 42% below acceptable parameters. Anomaly classification, escalating. She ignored it, focused on the last 5 golems. They'd clustered together, their runes synchronizing to create a shared energy field that made their stone even harder. Her fire-breathing hydralisks were running low on heat essence, their flames came weaker now, sputtering rather than roaring. One exhausted itself completely, collapsing as its internal reservoirs emptied. The queen made a decision. She pulled her phase-shifting hydralisks from reserve, they'd been held back, their ability to momentarily become intangible useless against physical blows but potentially valuable elsewhere. Now she sent them forward, not to attack but to distract. As they phased in and out of reality, flickering around the golems' heads, the constructs hesitated, their simple targeting protocols confused by targets that kept disappearing. In that moment of hesitation, her densified ravagers hit them from 3 sides. Stone met denser stone with a crash that echoed across the arena. Cracks propagated through golem and ravager alike, but her creatures healed faster, their biology adapting even as they fought. She lost another ravager, its carapace shattered under a combined hammer blow from 2 golems, but took both constructs down with it. The last 3 fell quickly after that, their formation broken. The final golem died to a coordinated strike, a fire-breathing hydralisk's weakened flame heating its back, Zerglings swarming its legs, and a ravager slamming into its chest with enough force to pulverize the rune cluster. It collapsed into shimmering particles that faded to nothing. Silence fell, broken only by the hum of the energy barriers and the ragged breathing of her surviving swarm. The queen took stock. 20 golems destroyed. Losses, 14 standard Zerglings, 2 ravagers, 1 hydralisk incapacitated from exhaustion. Her remaining forces bore injuries, cracked carapaces, limping limbs, 1 overlord with a damaged sensory frill from a near-miss shockwave. Biomass reserves were nearly non-existent, she'd recycled everything from her dead, but it had only been enough for emergency repairs. She felt the evolution she'd absorbed settling into her swarm's genetics. The density trait wasn't just about weight, it was structural integrity, resistance to impact, a fundamental hardening that made her creatures more durable against blunt force. Her surviving ravagers looked different now, darker, heavier, their movements leaving deep prints in stone. Even her standard Zerglings had gained some of the trait through proximity and shared essence, their carapaces taking on a stone-like sheen. The system voice spoke again, Wave 1, cleared. Adaptation efficiency, high. Anomaly persistence, confirmed. Initiating Wave 2. Before she could begin harvesting what little biomass remained from the arena floor, a few scraps of chitin, some spilled fluids, the air began to shimmer. New forms materialized, but not golems. They were sleek, chitinous things that mirrored her own swarm's silhouettes. 6 of them appeared first, each matching a Zergling in size and shape, but their carapaces were polished silver instead of organic black, and their eyes glowed with the same orange light as the golem's runes. Then 4 larger forms, hydralisk analogues, their spines gleaming with metallic edges. Finally, 2 floating orbs that might have been Overlord mimics, though they lacked sensory frills, instead sporting arrays of crystalline lenses. The Queen's tactical overlay identified them instantly, system-mimic drones. And as they settled into formation, the hydralisk mimics reared back, their thoraxes swelling exactly as hers did before breathing fire. From their mouths came not flame but concentrated beams of orange energy that crackled with heat, scorching the stone where they struck. Across the arena, the sound of mirrored hydralisk hisses echoed, a perfect, cold imitation of her own swarm's battle cries. The mimics moved with her unit's fluidity, their coordination flawless, and in their glowing eyes she saw nothing but empty replication. They had copied her abilities. And now they would use them against her. The last stone golem crumbled into inert rubble, its essence siphoned into the swarm queen's consciousness through the faint, familiar pull of adaptive Overlord Evolution. She felt the density trait settle into her surviving ravagers, hardening their carapaces with a gritty resilience that mirrored the arena's barren stone floor. But there was no time to savor the evolution. The air shimmered with a cold, mechanical hum, and before the echoes of the golem's collapse faded, the system's voice boomed across the expanse. Wave 2, System Mimic Drones activated. Deletion protocols remain active. From the arena's edges, 20 humanoid figures materialized, their forms flickering into existence with a sickening precision. They were not monsters but twisted reflections, pale, featureless drones that shifted and morphed as they locked onto her swarm. The queen's psychic senses flared, a jolt of recognition shooting through her hive mind. 2 of the drones elongated, sprouting serrated spines and maws that glowed with ember-orange heat, perfect copies of her fire-breathing hydralisks. 3 others bulked up, their limbs thickening with layered, stone-like plates, mirroring her resilient ravagers. The rest took on the sleek, predatory shapes of standard zerglings, though their movements were jerky, unnervingly synchronized. A cold dread, sharper than any frost from floor 6, coiled in the queen's mind. This was no mere monster wave, it was a mockery of her own essence. The drones moved as one, a hive without a queen, their tactics unfolding with eerie familiarity. They advanced in a pincer formation she had used against the climber party on floor 3, flanking maneuvers designed to isolate and overwhelm. Her swarm, battered from the golem fight, tensed. The 3 surviving ravagers, now denser with stone traits, formed a defensive line, while the 2 fire-breathing hydralisks hissed, ready to unleash their flames. The phase-shifting hydralisk flickered at the periphery, its form blurring as it prepared to strike from the shadows. The drones attacked first. Their fire-breathing mimics exhaled gouts of orange fire, identical in heat and range to her own. The queen's hydralisks returned fire, streams of flame colliding mid-air in a roaring inferno that lit the arena with a hellish glow. Ash and heatwaves washed over the stone, scorching the ground. Meanwhile, the mimic ravagers charged, their stone-plated bodies slamming into her real ones with a thunderous crash. The impact sent vibrations through the queen's psychic link, a jarring feedback of pain and resistance. Her zerglings darted in, claws slashing, but the drone zerglings met them with identical ferocity, their movements a perfect echo of her swarm's predatory grace. Stalemate. For minutes that felt like hours, the battle raged in a brutal symmetry. Every feint, every flank, every burst of fire was mirrored. The queen lost 2 standard zerglings to a coordinated pincer, their biomass dissolving into the arena's floor before she could harvest it. Her biomass reserves, already critically low, dwindled further with each loss. She felt the strain in her psychic control, the expanded range from the hive mind trial now a double-edged sword as it broadcast her every command to the mimicking drones. They anticipated her moves, reacting with a speed that bordered on precognition. This was not a test of evolution, she realized, her thoughts cutting through the chaos like a scalpel. The system was probing deeper, challenging her strategic mind, her ability to adapt without the crutch of new traits. Absorbing these drones through adaptive Overlord Evolution was a temptation, a siren call to strengthen her swarm, but her instincts screamed a warning. The mimic essence felt, corrupt, a hollow imitation that might dilute her hard-won traits or introduce glitches into her hive's genetic code. She had seen it on floor 4, where over-evolution without caution led to unstable mutations. No, this required a different kind of consumption. She shifted tactics, withdrawing her psychic commands from the front lines. To the drones, it would signal retreat, a feint. She ordered her swarm to fall back in a controlled, seemingly disorganized route, luring the mimics into pursuit. The arena's stone floor, scarred from previous battles, offered few hiding spots, but she remembered floor 4's desert sands, where burrowing had turned ambushes into massacres. Here, there was no soft earth, only solid rock, yet her zerglings had evolved minor excavation traits from scavenging biomass. They couldn't dig deep, but shallow depressions would suffice. As the mimics surged forward, confident in their mirrored advantage, the queen's psychic overlay flared. She directed her phase-shifting hydralisk to flicker behind their lines, not to attack but to disrupt, a ghost in the machine. Simultaneously, she sent her 3 ravagers to burrow hastily into cracks in the stone, their new density making the effort slow but possible. The drones, fixated on the retreating swarm, failed to notice the subtle shifts until it was too late. The trap sprang. From hidden crevices, the ravagers erupted, slamming into the mimic ravagers from below. The impact wasn't fatal, but it broke their formation, sending them stumbling into each other. At that moment, the queen's fire-breathing hydralisks ceased their retreat and turned, unleashing concentrated streams of fire not at the mimics but at the ground between them, creating walls of flame that cut off their retreat. The drones, programmed to mirror, tried to replicate the maneuver, but their coordination faltered, their command structure was centralized, not a true hive mind. That was the weakness. The Queen's psychic senses, honed by the trial, pierced the mimicry. Each drone had a faint, glowing core on its back, pulsing with a pale blue light, a command node, a crude imitation of her own psychic link. She focused her will, not on controlling them, but on overwhelming those nodes with psychic static, a technique refined from fainting in the hive mind trial. It was a gamble, draining her mental reserves, but she had no biomass to spare for physical evolution. She sacrificed another Zergling, sending it on a suicidal charge at a mimic hydralisk. As the drone focused on eliminating it, the Queen's phase shifter materialized behind, its spine striking not the body but the glowing core. A crackle of energy erupted, and the mimic hydralisk shuddered, its fire sputtering erratically. The disruption spread like a virus. Drones began to glitch, their movements becoming jerky, uncoordinated. One mimic ravager turned on a drone Zergling, its stone fists crushing the smaller form in a burst of corrupted biomass. Another fire-breathing mimic exhaled flames wildly, scorching its own allies. The Queen pressed the advantage. Her swarm, though depleted, moved with renewed precision. They targeted the cores, avoiding direct clashes where mimicry could still hold sway. Her hydralisks picked off glitching drones from range, while her ravagers used their density to bulldoze through the chaos. The arena filled with the sounds of shattering cores and dissolving forms, a symphony of systemic failure. She conserved every ounce of biomass, directing her Zerglings to harvest only the purest fragments from fallen drones, avoiding the tainted mimic essence. As the last drone, a twitching mimic ravager, collapsed, its core darkening to obsidian, the arena fell silent save for the Queen's ragged psychic breaths. Her swarm stood battered but victorious, Zerglings reduced to a mere 20, Ravagers down to 2, Hydralisks all functional but exhausted. The Overlords hovered above, their blizzard-sensing organs scanning for the next threat, minor damage from stray fire scarring their carapaces. Biomass reserves were negligible, a thin film of harvested essence barely sustaining the hive. Then, the ground rumbled. Not a subtle tremor, but a deep, tectonic groan that shook the arena to its foundations. Cracks spiderwebbed across the stone floor, glowing with a malevolent violet light. From the center, a massive portal tore open, swirling with chaotic energy that warped the air. The system's voice returned, colder and more final than before. Wave 3, Final Boss, Guardian Prime, Color, 01. Deletion protocols, imminent. A figure descended through the portal, its form blotting out the arena's artificial sky. It was a towering, advanced version of the earlier Guardian she had faced, a humanoid construct of polished black metal and glowing energy conduits, standing thrice the height of her largest Ravager. Dual energy whips crackled in its hands, each lash slicing the air with a sound like tearing reality. But worse was the aura it emitted, a hive-disrupting pulse that washed over the Queen, making her psychic link flicker and strain. Her swarm shuddered in unison, their coordination wavering as if drowning in static. Guardian Prime's eyes, slits of crimson light, fixed on her. It raised a whip, and the arena seemed to hold its breath. The arena trembled as Guardian Prime descended, its form a blur of polished obsidian and crackling energy. Towering over the remnants of the swarm, it moved with a predatory grace that made the previous wave seem sluggish by comparison. Dual whips of pure light uncoiled from its arms, humming with a frequency that vibrated through the stone floor. Each step left faint scorch marks, and the air grew thick with an oppressive aura, a psychic dampener that pressed against the Swarm Queen's mind like a physical weight. She felt the connection to her swarm fray at the edges. Commands that once flowed seamlessly now stuttered, met with sluggish responses from the Zerglings and Hydralisks. The psychic overlay in her vision flickered, static distorting the tactical readouts from her blizzard-sensing overlords. Guardian Prime didn't just attack, it eroded her control, its presence a corrosive force against her hive mind. The system's voice boomed from above, devoid of emotion. Anomaly elimination imminent, all resources allocated. As the words echoed, the arena's boundaries began to contract. Stone walls slid inward with a grinding roar, reducing the combat space by half within seconds. Debris from earlier battles, shattered golem fragments and glitching drone parts, was crushed against the encroaching barriers. The Swarm Queen's instincts screamed at the confinement, close quarters favored the Guardian's whips, which could cleave through multiple targets in a single sweep. Guardian Prime struck without warning. Its whips lashed out, not as individual strikes but as a net of light. 3 Zerglings, standard variants caught in a retreat, were severed mid-leap, their biomass dissolving into motes of energy before hitting the ground. The resilient Ravagers, with their stone-hardened carapaces, fared little better. One took a direct hit, the whip shearing through layered defenses as if they were paper, leaving a smoldering gash. The Queen felt each loss as a psychic jolt, a sharp pain that mirrored the physical strain of maintaining her dwindling control. She recalibrated, forcing her mind through the dampening aura. Through the Overlord senses, she mapped the Guardian's patterns. It favored wide, sweeping arcs with its whips, leaving its torso exposed for milliseconds after each attack. But reaching that core, a pulsating orb of blue light embedded in its chest, required getting past defenses that moved faster than her swarm could react. Her biomass reserves were critically low, barely enough to sustain the hive's basic functions. Another wave of sacrificial charges would drain them to nothing, risking collapse. Yet hesitation meant annihilation. The Queen gathered her remaining forces, 20 Zerglings, including the 2 evolved Ravagers, and 3 Hydralisks, their fire-breathing and phase-shifting abilities taxed from previous battles. She issued a psychic command, not as a detailed strategy but as a primal surge of intent: distract, overwhelm, create an opening. The swarm responded, their movements growing more coordinated as she poured her will into bypassing the dampener. They surged forward in a chaotic rush, Zerglings darting in from all angles while the Hydralisks hung back, firing bursts of flame and phase-shifted spines. Guardian Prime met them with contemptuous efficiency. Its whips became a whirlwind of death, carving through Zerglings in 2s and 3s. Each strike was precise, aimed at weak points, joints, sensory clusters, the bases of spines. Biomass evaporated around it, the arena floor littered with dissolving husks. The Queen counted the losses, 5 Zerglings gone in the first 10 seconds, then 7, then 10. Her psychic link strained, feedback pain lancing through her consciousness like shards of ice. But the sacrifice served its purpose. In the midst of the carnage, Guardian Prime's core flared brighter, cycling through attack patterns. The Queen noticed a pattern: after every third whip strike, the core dimmed slightly, as if drawing power to recharge. It was a vulnerability, a momentary overload. She focused her remaining psychic energy, channeling it through the overlords to enhance her perception. Time seemed to slow as she calculated the next opening. As the Guardian prepared another sweep, its core pulsed with a blinding light. The Queen acted. She sent the 2 resilient Ravagers charging directly at its legs, their stone-dense bodies slamming into the joints with enough force to stagger the entity. At the same instant, she psychically latched onto the core, her consciousness extending like a tendril of pure will. The contact was agonizing, a searing feedback of alien energy that burned through her biomass reserves. She felt her reserves plummet, the hive's vitality draining as if from an open wound. Her vision blurred, the psychic overlay flickering into static. Yet she held on, activating adaptive Overlord Evolution. The process wasn't gradual this time, it was a violent assimilation. The Guardian's advanced energy manipulation trait flooded into her, a torrent of data on controlling and weaponizing pure force. She absorbed it, the knowledge etching itself into her genetic memory even as the strain threatened to shatter her mind. Around her, the surviving Hydralisks shuddered, their forms warping in real time. Spines retracted, replaced by crackling nodes along their backs. They evolved into energy-infused Hydralisks, their maws glowing with unstable blue light. The Queen released her psychic grip, collapsing to one knee as feedback pain radiated through her body. Guardian Prime recovered, its whips lashing out again, but the Hydralisks were already reacting. They fired weak energy bolts, jagged streams of force that struck the whips with pinpoint accuracy. Each impact caused the light whips to flicker, their integrity weakening. The Queen directed them with ragged focus, targeting the same spots repeatedly. One whip shattered in a shower of sparks, then the other. Guardian Prime staggered, its movements becoming jerky, the core in its chest flashing erratically. For a moment, silence fell, broken only by the hum of dying energy. The Queen rose, her swarm reduced to a handful, 8 Zerglings, the 2 energy-infused Hydralisks, and the Overlords hovering precariously. Biomass reserves were nearly exhausted, the hive hovering on the brink of starvation. But victory seemed within grasp. Then Guardian Prime's core pulsed a deep crimson. A synthetic voice issued from it, flat and final. Catastrophic failure, detonation in 60 seconds. The arena walls flashed the same red, countdown numerals appearing in the air: 60, 59, 58. Cracks spread across the floor, glowing with molten heat. The Guardian's body began to fracture, light bleeding from its seams. The Swarm Queen's senses screamed with danger. This wasn't a defeat, it was a trap, a final purge. She had disabled the whips, but the system had allocated one last resource: total obliteration. The countdown ticked down, each second a hammer blow against her dwindling options. Escape or be consumed, the choice was now, and the arena offered no visible exits. The countdown echoed through the collapsing arena like a death knell. 30 seconds. Guardian Prime's metallic form pulsed with unstable energy, its core glowing with an intensity that seared the Queen's psychic senses even from across the shattered battlefield. Cracks spiderwebbed across the Guardian's plating, leaking streams of white-hot plasma that hissed against the stone floor. Her swarm responded to her distress before she could form the command. The 8 remaining Zerglings, 2 of them the evolved Ravagers with stone density traits, clustered around her psychic presence, their carapaces still steaming from the Guardian's energy whips. The 3 Hydralisks moved with painful slowness, their newly evolved energy-infused forms still adapting to the alien power coursing through their bioweapon systems. One of them stumbled, its left forelimb dragging where Guardian Prime's whip had severed half the muscle fibers. 25 seconds. The Queen's consciousness expanded through the hive mind, assessing damage with cold efficiency. Biomass reserves were critically depleted, barely enough to sustain basic metabolic functions for another hour. The 2 blizzard-sensing overlords floated above the carnage, their sensory membranes scanning the arena walls with frantic urgency. One transmitted a damage report: structural integrity compromised in 3 sectors, thermal reading spiking near the Guardian's position, no functional exit portals detected. Sealed, the Queen thought, the concept forming in her mind like ice. The system had designed this arena as a killbox, and now it would serve as their tomb if she couldn't find a flaw in its construction. 20 seconds. Her eyes, compound lenses refined through 6 floors of evolution, scanned the perimeter. The northern wall showed stress fractures from earlier tremors, likely caused when Guardian Prime first descended through its portal. One particular crack ran nearly 10 meters vertically, splitting at the top into a network of smaller fissures. Behind it, her heat-sensing capabilities detected cooler air flowing through gaps in the structure. There, she psychically projected to the overlords. Map structural weaknesses. Calculate force required for breach. The overlords responded instantly, their sensory membranes pulsing as they analyzed the wall. Data streamed into her consciousness: stone composition, thickness, stress points, thermal differentials. The crack penetrated 70% through the wall's 3-meter thickness. Beyond lay what appeared to be maintenance infrastructure: coolant pipes, energy conduits, access tunnels. 15 seconds. Guardian Prime's core began to vibrate, emitting a high-frequency whine that made the Zerglings shudder. Chunks of ceiling rained down, smashing into the arena floor with concussive force. One piece the size of a small vehicle crushed 2 Zerglings before they could scatter, their biomass instantly rendered unrecoverable in the impact crater. The Queen didn't mourn the loss. She redirected the remaining 6 Zerglings, forming them into a protective cordon around the Hydralisks. Energy-infused units, target the primary fracture. Concentrated fire on my mark. The 2 evolved Hydralisks, their carapaces still glowing with the faint blue energy they'd absorbed from Guardian Prime, turned their weaponized limbs toward the wall. The phase-shifting Hydralisk, too exhausted to contribute meaningfully, positioned itself as a living shield, its body flickering between solid and translucent states as it conserved its remaining energy. 10 seconds. Fire. The energy-infused Hydralisks unleashed their new capabilities for the first time under controlled conditions. Blue-white bolts of concentrated energy lanced from their bio-cannons, striking the crack with pinpoint accuracy. The first impact sent spiderwebs of new fractures radiating outward. The second punched through completely, revealing darkness beyond. But the opening was too small, barely wide enough for a single Zergling to squeeze through sideways. 8 seconds. Again. Sustained barrage. The Hydralisks fired continuously, their energy bolts heating the stone to incandescence. Molten rock dripped from the edges of the growing hole, hissing as it struck the arena floor. The overlords coordinated the assault, directing fire patterns to maximize structural collapse. One transmitted a warning: Guardian Prime's core had reached critical mass. Detonation imminent. 6 seconds. The Queen made a calculation. The opening was now large enough for the Hydralisks and overlords to pass through, but not quickly enough. They needed more time, or more force. She turned to the Zerglings. The 2 Ravagers with stone density traits stood slightly apart from their lighter brethren, their bodies heavier, slower, but more resilient. You 4, she directed the standard Zerglings. Form living shield against falling debris. Protect escape route. The 4 Zerglings didn't hesitate. They scrambled toward the widening crack, positioning themselves beneath unstable sections of ceiling. One looked back at her with compound eyes that reflected no fear, only obedience. The hive mind didn't question sacrifice. 4 seconds. The Ravagers she directed differently. You too. Ram the weakened edges. Use your density as battering rams. The stone-dense Ravagers charged, their heavier bodies moving with surprising momentum. They struck the edges of the hole simultaneously, their reinforced carapaces shattering already weakened stone. Chunks the size of boulders fell away, widening the passage to nearly 2 meters across. 2 seconds. Guardian Prime's core flashed white, blinding even through the Queen's filtered vision. The temperature in the arena spiked instantly, cooking the air in their lungs. The 4 Zerglings forming the living shield were crushed as a massive section of ceiling collapsed, but their bodies absorbed the impact that would have buried the escape route. 1 second. Now, the Queen commanded, her psychic voice cutting through the roaring heat. The Hydralisks scrambled through the opening first, their elongated bodies squeezing through the jagged stone. The Overlords followed, their floating forms barely clearing the top of the hole. The Queen moved next, her own body, larger than a Hydralisk but more flexible than it appeared, twisting through the gap. The 2 Ravagers came last, their stone-dense forms scraping against rock as they forced their way through. 0. The explosion wasn't a sound so much as a cessation of all other sensation. Light filled the world, pure, annihilating whiteness that burned through closed eyelids. Pressure followed, a wall of force that hit the Queen's back like a mountain falling on her. She felt carapace crack, internal organs compress, psychic connections sever as members of her swarm were obliterated in the blast. Then she was tumbling through darkness, her body bouncing off metal pipes and concrete walls. The maintenance shaft they'd entered was collapsing around them, shaken by the arena's destruction. She heard, no, felt through the hive mind, the 2 Ravagers being buried under falling debris. Their psychic presences flickered out one after the other, snuffed like candles in a hurricane. Her own consciousness wavered. The psychic form that housed her intelligence, the core of her being separate from her physical body, screamed in agony. Connections to her swarm frayed, snapped, reformed weakly. She was a queen without subjects, a mind without a hive, floating in pain and darkness. Time lost meaning. She might have been falling for seconds or hours. Her body struck a metal grate, bounced, landed on a platform. Cool air washed over her, carrying the scent of ozone and rust. Distant alarms wailed, their sounds muffled as if through layers of insulation. Slowly, painfully, she opened her eyes. Floor 8 spread before her, a desolate expanse of metal platforms interconnected by narrow walkways, all suspended over a bottomless black void. No sky above, only a ceiling of dark metal studded with faintly glowing crystals that provided minimal illumination. The air hung heavy and still, untouched by wind or weather. To her enhanced senses, the entire floor felt dead, sterilized, scrubbed clean of any organic presence. Her swarm lay scattered around her. Only one Hydralisk had survived the escape, the phase-shifting variant, its body now fully translucent as it conserved energy. The 2 energy-infused Hydralisks were gone, either destroyed in the explosion or buried in the collapse. The Overlords floated nearby, their sensory membranes torn, but still functional. Of the Zerglings and Ravagers, nothing remained. She tried to stand, but her rear legs refused to bear weight. Looking back, she saw the damage, her carapace was cracked in a dozen places, leaking vital fluids that pooled beneath her. One wing was torn completely off, lying several meters away like discarded chitin. The psychic agony hadn't been metaphorical, the explosion had damaged her connection to the hive mind itself, leaving her thoughts sluggish, fragmented. A system notification appeared in her vision, glowing with sterile blue light that hurt to look at. Regional climax achieved, Floor 7 conquered. Annihilation Arena, cleared. Deletion protocols, overridden temporarily. Reward, Floor 8 access granted. Warning, anomaly detection threshold exceeded. Escalation protocols, activated. The words meant little through the haze of pain. Conquered. Overridden. Temporary. The system acknowledged her victory even as it prepared new ways to eliminate her. There was no satisfaction in the notification, only the cold certainty of continued conflict. She dragged herself toward the phase-shifting Hydralisk, her movements jerky, uncoordinated. The creature shifted to solid form as she approached, nuzzling her damaged carapace with its head. Through their weakened psychic link, she felt its concern, its loyalty, its readiness to die for her if commanded. The Overlord settled beside them, their sensory membranes extending to assess her injuries. Biomass, she thought, the concept forming with difficulty. Need biomass to heal. To rebuild. But Floor 8 offered nothing. No plants, no creatures, not even moss growing in the joints between metal plates. Just sterile emptiness stretching into darkness. Then she heard them. Footsteps. Multiple sets, moving with purpose across the metal walkways. Not the heavy tread of monsters or the mechanical precision of tower guardians. These were lighter, varied, the sounds of living beings wearing different types of footwear on hard surfaces. Her remaining Overlord detected them first, transmitting a sensory overlay to her damaged consciousness. 5 figures approached from the northeast, moving along an elevated walkway that connected to her platform. Humanoid shapes, armed and armored. Heat signatures indicated elevated body temperatures, adrenaline, anticipation, combat readiness. They emerged from the shadows between 2 support pillars, their forms backlit by the faint crystal glow from above. At the front walked a man in gleaming plate armor, a tower shield strapped to his back and a 2-handed sword held ready. Beside him, an archer with a composite bow already nocked, her eyes scanning the platform with hunter's precision. Behind them, a woman in robes marked with healing sigils, her hands already glowing with preparatory magic. To her left, a rogue-type figure with twin daggers, moving with silent grace. And at the rear, a mage in deep blue robes, frost forming around his fingertips. Elite climbers. Drawn by the explosion. Their expressions showed no curiosity, only cold assessment as they took in her battered form, her single surviving hydralisk, her damaged overlords. The armored warrior pointed his sword at her, his voice echoing across the metal platform with grim finality. Irregular confirmed. Elimination protocol authorized. The archer drew her bowstring taut, the arrowhead glinting with enchanted sharpness. The mage began chanting, the temperature dropping as frost spread across the walkway toward them. The queen tried to rise, to command her swarm, to fight. But her body refused. Her psychic connections screamed with fresh pain. The phase-shifting hydralisk positioned itself between her and the climbers, its body flickering in and out of visibility, the only defense she had left. On the sterile metal of Floor 8, with her swarm reduced to 3 units and her own body broken, the system's escalation had arrived not as guardians or traps, but as the tower's most efficient predators, climbers who saw her not as a rival, but as a glitch to be corrected. The warrior took a step forward, his armor clanking in the dead air. Make it quick. The system wants this floor clean. The metallic platform of Floor 8 stretched out in stark, angular lines, a brutalist landscape of rusting iron and polished steel that reflected the sickly green glow of distant system ruins. There was no wind, no scent of life, only the sterile tang of ozone and the faint hum of dormant machinery buried beneath the grated floor. The Swarm Queen's remaining units stood in a ragged formation around her, their carapaces scarred and leaking viscous fluids. Her own body ached with every psychic pulse, the cracked plates along her thorax throbbed where Guardian Prime's energy had seared through, and her left wing hung uselessly, a tattered membrane of chitin and torn muscle. 3 units. That was all that remained of the swarm that had devoured floors and absorbed ecosystems. The phase-shifting hydralisk crouched low, its form flickering between visibility and a translucent haze as it conserved energy. The 2 blizzard-sensing overlords floated above, their sensory fronds twitching as they scanned the environment, feeding her tactical overlays of the industrial zone. No biomass reserves lingered in her internal stores, only the faint echoes of consumed traits, fire affinity from the human mage, paralytic toxins from the Myconid Queen, stone density from the Ravagers, energy manipulation from Guardian Prime. They were tools etched into her genetic memory, waiting to be wielded. Footsteps echoed, deliberate and synchronized. 5 figures emerged from behind a towering metal spire, their gear gleaming with system-enchanted light. The armored warrior led, his plate mail adorned with glowing sigils that pulsed with defensive energy. Beside him, an archer knocked an arrow tipped with frost, her eyes narrowed behind a visor. A healer in white robes hovered a hand over a glowing orb, while a rogue melted into the shadows of a support beam, only the glint of a dagger betraying his position. The frost mage brought up the rear, staff raised, crystalline ice forming in the air around him. System glitch detected, the warrior announced, his voice amplified by his helmet. Irregular entity designated Swarm Queen. Surrender for debugging protocols, or be purged. The Queen's mind raced, calculating distances, angles, weaknesses. These were not desperate climbers like the ones on Floor 3, they moved with military precision, their equipment superior, their confidence absolute. They saw her not as a monster to be feared, but as an error to be corrected. Her psychic control wavered for a moment, the damage to her connections from the arena still fresh, but she forced stability, reaching out to her units. The phase-shifting Hydralisk responded first, its form blurring as it prepared to strike. No native life here, she thought, her consciousness brushing against the barren metal. No biomass to harvest. No traits to absorb unless I take them from them. The archer loosed her arrow. It flew in a shimmering arc, frost trailing behind it. The queen jerked sideways, the projectile grazing her carapace and leaving a patch of rime that seeped cold into her flesh. The frost mage followed up, chanting words that crystallized the air, forming jagged ice shards that rained down. The overlords dodged, their blizzard sensing abilities allowing them to predict the patterns, but one took a hit to its frond, spraying ichor. Frontline, she commanded psychically. The phase-shifting Hydralisk lunged, not at the warriors, but at the healer. It phased through a sudden ice wall the mage erected, appearing behind the white-robed figure, mandibles snapping. The healer shrieked, but the warrior was already there, shield slamming into the Hydralisk with a metallic clang. The impact sent the unit skidding back, its phase shift flickering from the disruption. They're coordinated, the queen analyzed, heat-sensing capabilities highlighting their formation. The rogue is flanking. The archer is targeting my overlords. An arrow whistled past an overlord's eye stalk. The rogue emerged from shadows, dagger aimed at the queen's injured wing. She twisted, but not fast enough, the blade bit deep, and agony lanced through her psychic network. She retaliated with a psychic burst, a raw wave of disruption that made the rogue stagger, clutching his head. But it cost her, the cracked carapace along her thorax split further, oozing black fluid. Biomass critical, her instincts screamed. No reserves. Cannot sustain prolonged engagement. The frost mage was chanting again, this time weaving a net of ice that crept across the floor, threatening to immobilize them. The warrior advanced, shield raised, sword glowing with enchantment. The queen felt the weight of their system-backed authority. They were not just climbers, they were enforcers, extensions of the towers will to cull anomalies like her. Adaptive Overlord Evolution, she thought, the cheat ability stirring in her core. One last activation. Burn everything. She reached deep, not for new traits, but for synthesis. The fire affinity from the human mage, the energy manipulation from Guardian Prime, the tactical overlays from her overlords, the resilience from the Ravagers, all of it, every absorbed trait, every shred of genetic memory. She focused it not on creating a new swarm unit, but on evolving an existing one. The two blizzard-sensing overlords shuddered in mid-air, their forms contorting as she poured her remaining biomass reserves into them, fusing them together in a violent, painful metamorphosis. Chitin cracked and reformed. Sensory fronds expanded into crystalline arrays. Wings thickened, thrumming with captured energy. The biomass reserves, what little had been left, evaporated, consumed in the transformation. When it was done, a single entity hovered before her, the Overlord Ascendant. It was larger, sleeker, its carapace a dark, iridescent blue that shimmered with internal energy. Psychic tendrils extended from it, weaving a network that enhanced her control, sharpening her tactical overlays into real-time predictive models. Project Minor Energy Shields, she commanded, testing its capabilities. The Overlord Ascendant pulsed, and translucent barriers of faint blue energy flickered into existence around the Queen and the phase-shifting Hydralisk. The Frost Mage's ice shards shattered against them, dissipating harmlessly. The archer's next arrow bounced off, its frost magic negated by the energy field. Now, the Queen thought, her strategic planning evolving with the new unit's insights. She directed the phase-shifting Hydralisk not to attack, but to harass. It phased through the warrior's shield, appearing and disappearing, striking at the healer's orb, then the archer's quiver, never engaging fully. The Overlord Ascendant coordinated, its psychic network allowing the Hydralisk to anticipate movements, dodging the rogue's ambushes with preternatural timing. The climber's formation broke, the warrior barked orders, but the healer was too busy defending his orb, the Frost Mage's spells splintering against the energy shields. The Queen seized the opening. She lunged, not at the warrior, but at the leader himself. Her damaged body screamed in protest, but the Overlord Ascendant's enhancements fueled her. She bypassed his shield with a psychic disruption focused on his helmet sigils, causing them to flicker and die. As he staggered, she pinned him with her remaining functional limbs, mandibles closing around his pauldron, not to kill, but to absorb. Tactical insight, she thought, activating Adaptive Overlord Evolution one final time, not for a new unit, but for herself. She latched onto the strategic knowledge embedded in his gear. The system granted understanding of squad tactics, terrain exploitation, enemy prioritization. It flooded her mind, merging with her own hive mind strategies, evolving her planning into something more refined, more predictive. The warrior struggled, but the queen had already withdrawn, leaving him alive but disarmed. "Retreat," he yelled, his voice raw. The other climbers hesitated, but the Overlord Ascendant projected a wave of psychic pressure that sent them stumbling back. They fled, disappearing into the metallic maze. Their mission failed. Silence descended, broken only by the hum of the platform and the queen's labored breathing. She surveyed the aftermath, no biomass gained, but the Overlord Ascendant hovered steadily, its energy shields dissipating. The phase-shifting Hydralisk stood guard, exhausted but intact. Floor 8 was hers, not by devouring its ecosystem, but by defending it against those who would erase her. She moved to the center of the platform, where the metal was thickest. Using her mandibles and the Hydralisk strength, she began to scavenge, tearing sheets of steel and iron from nearby structures. The Overlord Ascendant directed the effort, its enhanced coordination allowing them to fortify a small, defensible area. They built a hive nest, crude compared to the organic hives of lower floors, but functional, a bastion of jagged metal and hidden tunnels. She settled into it, her injuries still aching, but her psychic connection stabilizing with the Ascendant's support. As she secured the last piece of plating, the system runes across the floor flared to life. A monotone voice echoed in her mind, devoid of the earlier hostility. "Irregular status, acknowledged. Tower core access unlocked at floor 100. Continue climb to initiate core interface." She gazed up, past the metallic ceiling, into the infinite darkness of higher floors. 100 floors to go. The goal of consuming the tower's core felt simultaneously closer and more distant, a prize dangled before her, but one that would require devouring countless more trials, more ecosystems, more enemies. Then, a whisper brushed against her consciousness, faint and alien, yet familiar in its hive-mind resonance. It came from somewhere far above, a psychic message trapped in the tower's depths, speaking of other swarms, other queens, other hungers. She listened, her new strategic planning already analyzing the implications. As Floor 8's industrial silence settled around her fortified nest, the first true foothold in her climb to consume it all.